All right. Hello. How are you guys all doing today? Hopefully you
We're
guys are
doing great, Logan!
Oh, Nate, you're here. Oh my gosh, how long you been here?
Like 4 seconds.
Oh, okay. I was gonna say. And I think Cole should be joining us too, so we might have crew today.
I
That'll
was
be good.
scaring you.
I mean, you came at the perfect time to scare me like that, so. But how's it going today, Nate?
Going fine.
Okay, that's good. That's good. I'm glad to hear it. Oh, and Cole is here. He's already telling me to drink some water, which I appreciate that. I'm probably gonna need more water whenever I rant for like 2 hours, but I'll take water now too.
Rant for 2 hours. Oh boy, what are we getting into?
Of course. That's what we do here. You know, well, it's I feel like it's 50-50. 50% of the time there's some good conversation and we just talk with each other. And the other 50% of the time there's like no comments and it's just a bunch of people watching, which I'm fine with. But on those days it's much more of like me on my soapbox, like,
We got a
ah.
spicy chapter upcoming?
What was that?
We got a spicy chapter upcoming or something?
Uh, not. I mean, there's some things in it that'll be interesting to talk about. Um, so essentially, today, as a quick synopsis, not to spoil too much, but we are going to essentially the covenant between God and Israel is going to be like sealed in stone. So, they came to Sinai, and then God is like, I want to enter into a covenant with you. And then, he gives off like his commands of the people. And then now that he's done that, like they have to essentially seal it in stone. Like, hey, we both agree this sounds good, kind of a deal. So there's some interesting things in it. I mean, it's gonna be essentially what we've been talking about for the last couple weeks. In that there's a lot of cultural things in here that don't make sense to us today. That you know would have made sense to people hundreds and thousands of years ago. But yeah, we can get there at some point. Oh, Cole, you got your brake fixed. Okay, so for anybody who doesn't know, Cole put in the prayer request section. His brakes went out at school just this week. Praise that nobody was hurt. Clearly, whenever brakes go out, bad things can happen. But luckily, fortunately, the brakes went out and nobody was hurt. Anything like that. So big praise there. And now another praise that the brakes were fixed. So we'll take it. And Cole, if you're
Yeah.
free, you can feel free to join me and Nate and talk with us. You're not delegated just to the chat if you want to come join. I know that sometimes you like to join and talk, so just figured I'd offer that. Or if Molly's there too, she can come join as well.
Yeah.
Whew. So yeah, it'll be an interesting section. It's I also have a couple more things that I want to touch on from last week. I talked a little bit about it yesterday, but I'll go into it again today. It's stuff that I've looked up and seen as of this past week to add to last week, some context to make it a little bit more cohesive, if that makes sense. So that'll be fun. Finishing dinner and Molly is here. Gotcha. Okay. Well, if you guys want to join, feel free. If not, that's fine as well. Either way, glad that you're here right now and glad that we get to talk for a little bit. So yeah, we heard from Nate's day, covered a little bit about Cole's day. Anybody else have anything they want to talk about specifically from today? I guess I can go over my day if you guys have any interest in hearing that at all. Probably not, but I'll go into it while I wait for everybody else to put in what they have going on for the day. So I went to the chapel this morning. So we had a full band set up, so it was a whole, shindig. Had to pull out the drum kit and mic it and, all the fancy stuff. So we had a whole crew today. So it was, a little bit of running around, getting everything set up, and then, of course, have to do, sound, so the way, people are super busy here at the seminary, so it's really hard to get, Well, that's a whole other story. I have been advocating for about a year and a half now for us to do a chapel run through the day beforehand, so we're not doing an entire setup and sound check and practice within the like hour to two before chapel. But anyways, that aside, um, of course, then after everything was set up, we did the whole run through of it. It was a really good speaker today. He was a really good speaker. I forget his name. He was a guest speaker. He was really good though. It was a short like kind of homily message today to lead into communion because on Wednesdays we do communion to end our services, um, which is always really nice. And then after that, lunch, and then there's a paper I've been working on for Gospel Catechesis, which is one of the classes I'm taking this semester. Um, it's a shorter paper, not too long, about 2,000 words, and it's essentially about how I see discipling and teaching having shaped and formed me in the past. It's kind of like a preliminary paper for the class to say like, okay, well, how has this type of a, so we spent the first couple weeks talking about like what it means to disciple and teach, and now we're going to reflect on how we feel like that type of teaching and everything has like affected us in our lifetime, whether it's been intentional or not. And then the rest of the semester, we're going to go through different methods for discipling and teaching believers that have existed throughout church history, and what might be effective for today and stuff like that. So that's like a paper I've been working on today. Went to the gym, um, did chest day, so I'm a little bit sore. um, Real heavy on bench today. I did some readings for other classes. I worked a little bit on doing a chapter or a segment survey for Acts, chapter 3 and 4. Because I'm doing a book survey of the book of Acts this semester. So, like, every week we have a segment survey of, like, a chapter or two. Um, so, yeah, getting through that. It's a really interesting book, Acts. In a lot of ways, actually, it's actually very similar to Exodus.
Mhm.
Funny enough, in that both Exodus,
Modes
what was that?
of establishing of new rule sets.
Yeah, well, I mean that's a good part too. So the thing I was gonna point out first is that it's a geographic narrative, which there's not a lot of geographic narratives throughout the Bible in general, but a geographic narrative essentially being a narrative that is not focused on people, events, or anything like that, but it is a narrative that is focused specifically on places, right? So Exodus, the entire narrative is focused on how the places affect the narrative, right? And the different places have different symbolic significance within the story, and they kind of guide the narrative along, right? So we started off in Egypt, and then there's Midian, there's Sinai, there's the wilderness. Even the different regions in Egypt had significance, and it's the same thing with Acts. So the narrative of Acts, actually, I could pull it up right here, so it might make a little bit more sense. Um, Real quick before we get started. So here's our passage for today, but I have my other logo stuff pulled up here, going through Acts 4 and 3 for the survey. But the prologue to the book here is chapter 1, obviously. So there is a statement for the recipient. So Acts was a book written by Luke, which, if you don't know, Luke and Acts, the Gospel of Luke and the book of Acts are a 2-volume work. So that's why this first line starts off like this. In the first book, O Theophilus, I have dealt with all that Jesus began to do and teach until the day he was taken up, and he had commands through the Holy Spirit to the apostles whom he had chosen. And we know that the Gospel of Luke was also written to Theophilus. The belief is that Luke and Acts were a 2-part work written by Luke himself. So
Didn't know
Luke,
that.
it's not a super commonly known thing, like at like kind of the church level,
Yeah.
because it's not really
Reading
super.
through it right now on my own.
What was that?
I'm reading through Luke right now on my own, so interesting.
Really? Okay,
Yeah.
okay. So you'll have to go right into Acts after it, get the sequel.
Maybe, yeah. I mean, I'm trying to read more of the Bible, but I feel like every single time I try, like, oh, read Matthew and then Genesis at the same time, do it all in one year, I just
Mm,
peter off. So I'm like, I'm just gonna start somewhere random
okay.
that I know I haven't gotten into.
So you've been trying to do the whole Bible in 1 year? Is that kind of like the hope,
I've
or
tried that a couple of times, and
okay?
I just never get into it. So I'm trying to.
I will say,
Yeah.
I did do that not last year, the year before, 2022. I read the whole Bible in a year, and I think it's a fun challenge. I don't think I'll do it again personally, not because of how hard it was, but because I don't. I think for some people it might be a really good way to read the Bible. I don't think it was a good way for me personally. I don't like to deal with large portions of scripture at a time on a daily basis. I like to do how we kind of do with this Bible study. Like we take a chapter or two and we just like dwell on it for like a week and let it
Hmm.
soak in. Like if I'm reading like 4 or 5 chapters a day, I don't really have time to let that soak in. And like I know it works
Doing
for
like
some
two a
people,
day,
but
one in the morning and one at night right now.
yeah. And even that like can be a little bit too fast for
Yeah.
me. Like
Sometimes I'm reading a parable and I'm like, yeah, I didn't really understand what just happened there. Oh well,
yeah,
next.
exactly.
Next.
And you don't have time to like sit it and
Yeah.
dwell in it and everything. So anyway, Cole, I did see your comment. I'm gonna get back to that because I do want to talk about that as well. But while I'm on this train of thought, so Acts begins with this statement. This is essentially recap from Luke to the reader that's important, right? In the past book, I dealt with all that Jesus did. He presented himself alive, speaking about the kingdom. And then this final line, while staying with him, he ordered them not to depart from Jerusalem, but to wait for the promise of the Father. But you will be baptized with the Holy Spirit not many days from now. And then we start the actual kind of narrative of the book starts here in verse 6. And this kind of serves as a not just a prologue for the book, this little paragraph here, but it also serves as a summary statement for the rest of the book, right? And specifically this line here in verse 8, right? This is a pretty popular verse, but it is a summary statement of the entire rest of the book. So it says, "But you will receive power when the Holy Spirit has come upon you, and you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem and in all Judea and Samaria and to the ends of the earth." And this is essentially the exact order that the rest of the book is laid out. So this kind of serves a dual meaning in that Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and the ends of the earth are all symbolic of different people groups, but also that they serve as the plot line for the narrative and for the direction that the gospel will go. So Jerusalem is the first one that's noticed, and Jerusalem is the local city that they were dwelling within. So they have to start off by doing local missions to their neighbors in their local town. And then Judea is the surrounding nation. So the idea is that after it is spread into the city, then the rest of the nation will also be welcome to the rest of the message. Not only just geographically the nation, but Judea is also symbolic of the Jews themselves, right? So the message will be spread to the Jews first, as was seen in the Gospels and is also seen here in the first 8 chapters of the book of Acts. And then there's a key pivot in the book from chapters 8 to 12 where, first of all, the persecution begins, where Stephen is killed, who's the first martyr of the church, meaning that the church has to have different methods for spreading the gospel. But also, that persecution leads the message to go outside of Judea to surrounding nations. So, this is also where Peter has the vision from God, where God tells him essentially that there are no thing. Well, the vision is a analogy, but in the vision that Peter receives, God says that you shall eat, a pig, whatever, and Peter says, I can't, I'm a Jew, it's unclean. And God says, nothing that I have made is unclean. And the idea, once Peter realizes what that vision is about, Peter realizes that what God was talking about is that other people, the Gentiles, are not unclean as the Jews would have thought. The Jews would have thought that they were God's chosen people and that the Gentiles are unclean secular people that don't, deserve this message. But God revealed to Peter that the Gentiles are not unclean people. Which, if you don't know what the Gentiles are just any people group that are not Jews. So the Samaritans, right? So it goes from Judea to Samaria. So Samaria is essentially half Jewish, half not. So the Samaritans were a group that used to be Jewish who intermarried with a local people, and they were considered to be it's a odd term and it's kind of derogatory, but that's the point. The Jews would have called them half breeds, and they were seen as kind of Gentiles, kind of not. So the idea is that then after spreading the message to the Jews, it goes to Samaria, not just geographically, but also symbolically to their neighbors, to their cousins, and then to the ends of the earth, which is seen in Paul through the second half of the book as he spreads the message to the Gentiles, right? So the first half of the book is about spreading the message to the Jews in Jerusalem and Judea, and the second half is about spreading it to the Gentiles in Samaria and to the ends of the earth. And Rome is actually the climax of the book, because Rome symbolically was as far as you could get from the Jewish people. It was, the home of secularism and paganism and all that stuff. So it's kind of symbolically the ends of the earth. So whenever the gospel is first preached in Rome, in the last couple verses of the book, in chapter 28, that's symbolically the message reaching the ends of the earth. So the entire narrative flows through these geographic locations, and the geographic locations lead the narrative in the directions that it goes, tying in with the persecution and the people groups and stuff like that in the same way that Exodus does. But also, like you were saying, Nate, it also has to do with starting a new covenant people, and what that looks like for the first Israelites and for the first believers. So yeah, both are super similar books, weirdly enough. And I'm going through both of them. So, isn't that fun? Yeah, exactly.
Actually, wish we kind of did some of these Bible study things on New Testament stuff, and we're going to be stuck in the Old Testament for the next 20 years.
Oh yeah, I mean at this
Nice.
rate, it's gonna be a hot minute. So
Yeah.
we might do more off. I mean, we did for
We can
Christmas.
flip flop.
We could flip flop. I did the offshoot one for Christmas where we went through the Christmas story. So we could do more offshoot ones like that occasionally. That could be fun.
I want to hear some spicy parable hot takes.
Well, if you want hot takes, more of my hot takes can come from the Old Testament. So
Okay.
well, specifically Genesis. Genesis is where you can get a lot of my hot takes. I think
I'll have to
Genesis
rewatch
and
some of those.
yeah. I think Genesis in general is where a lot of hot takes come from the Christian sphere. Surrounding creation and Noah's Ark and Babel and all that stuff. I think there's just because they're so unknown to us. It's so foreign, it's so old. There's no other records, there's nothing. So it's just like all kind of debate and speculation and all this stuff, whereas the rest of it, like even Abraham, once we get to Abraham centuries after, like we have record of like we have archaeologists that have dug that place up, so it's like, oh well, like that's a real place. And like these stories in Egypt, we have Egyptian records that talk about these pharaohs and similar events, and like there's actually in the pharaoh records, like there's the Merneptah stele and a couple other different things that mention specifically Israel as an enemy of Egypt, and stuff like that. So like we know a lot more past Abraham, but everything before Abraham, ooh, spicy stuff. Altus, good to see you, man. Good to see you, Altus. How's it going today? And yes, Cole, I got to get back to your question now that I'm off of my soapbox. Should I get Helldivers 2? This is a question from Cole. I am inclined to say yes.
It's
And I'm gonna.
$40.
Oh, is it 20?
It's 40.
Oh, that's what I was gonna say. I thought it was a lot more than 20. Yeah. I don't know why I heard 20, but I really want to. Cole, ever since you showed me that first video of Helldivers 2, I keep seeing videos pop up on my feed and I keep seeing them and it makes me want to play it really bad. I just know, like, I just got into Power World and I have barely scratched that game. And I don't want to already move on from Power World, and I definitely don't have time to be playing both at the same time. There's no chance I have time to be playing both. I mean, maybe I can play, like, Helldivers 2 a little bit on the weekend, and then, I don't know, but we can't do Power World on stream anymore. I don't know.
So you
I
get a
do.
computer.
It also sucks because it's not on Xbox. And that might just be a game that might have problems running on my computer. Like, my computer is fairly powerful.
Oh yeah,
but,
if you can't if you can't play Power World, you definitely can't play Helldivers.
well, I can play Power World, but I can't play Power World and stream.
Yeah.
Trying to play Power World and stream at the same time is what breaks it. Like, Power World by itself runs fine, but Power World and streaming kills it. I mean, I could probably play it on medium or lower graphics, I think. I mean, I've been able to play stuff similar to it before on this laptop. Like, there was that little bit of time I was playing Warzone on it, and it played fairly well. So if Warzone can play fairly well, I would hope Helldivers 2 could. But I really want to play it. Cole, if you end up buying Helldivers 2, tell me, because I would seriously consider it. I don't know. Anyways, comically, Israel is always listed as the servant enemy or something like that. All those terrifying. Yeah. So I can get into that for a little bit, actually. So, the Merneptah Steel, that might be what you're referring to, Altus. I'm not sure. I know there's a couple different things that we know of from Egypt that mention Israel. Actually, I can maybe Google the Merneptah Steel so I can show it to you guys. Yeah, sorry, I spelled Merneptah's name wrong, but so this is essentially the Merneptah Steel, if you guys can see it. Does that show up for you guys? Yeah, so this is it. It's this massive thing. And Merneptah is, I believe, the pharaoh that comes after Ramses II. Let me go double check my notes on that. Yeah, so there's Seti the First, which we believe is the pharaoh at the beginning of the book of Exodus. So essentially, the ruler. Whenever we start the book of Exodus, it mentions that there was a new pharaoh who came upon that arose over the nation of Israel, who did not know Joseph or his people, and decided to put the Israelites into slavery. And then that pharaoh dies while Moses is out in the land of Midian. And then whenever Moses comes back to free the Israelites from captivity, it's a different pharaoh than the one that was his father, his adoptive father. So we believe that Seti the First was the ruler who put the Israelites into oppression, and then Seti the First died, and Ramses the Second was then the pharaoh that Moses spoke to, who hardened his heart and kept the Israelites under oppression over the 10 plagues. And then after Ramses the Second dies, we have Merneptah. Merneptah is the pharaoh that comes right after Ramses the Second, and that is the pharaoh who has this inscription. And in this inscription, there is essentially, somewhere on this long thing, there's a specific. Oh yeah, up here at the top, Merneptah Steel Israel. But somewhere along this Merneptah Steel, there is a short list of all of the neighboring nations. And it's kind of like this triumphant war cry where Merneptah's like, yeah, we conquered this nation and we crushed this nation and we stepped on the heel of this one. And it's kind of like this list of all the neighboring nations and how Merneptah's just obliterated all of them. And at the very end of that list is Israel, which that actually has a couple interesting implications. First of all, it shows us that Israel would have been mighty enough of a force to have made its way onto this list. Because if it was just a small people group that was somewhere in the wilderness, like the Midianites or something like that, there would have been no reason for Merneptah to list them on this list. He's only going to put people on this list who were a worthy enough opponent to have bragged about defeating. So just the fact that the Israelites are put on that list shows something about their, power in the land and their power over Egypt, right? Potentially that's coming from Ramses II during the plagues, or who knows. But the other interesting thing is, forgive me, I don't know Egyptian hieroglyphics, so I wouldn't be able to show it to you. But but my professor knows. The professor who taught me about the Merneptah stele, he knows Egyptian hieroglyphics, and he explained it to me one day, or to the class in general, not just me. He explained it in the class, and I don't know the symbols, so I wouldn't be able to show it to you, or I can do my best to explain it. But essentially, so the hieroglyphics don't really work like a alphabetic language. They're more like they're a symbolic language, which works differently. So different symbols mean different things, not necessarily like syllables. Like an alphabetic language works off of syllables to create word constructions that symbolize something, whereas in a hieroglyphic language, yeah, Altus, what you just said, people with no city. So that's what I was just going to say that. So in the Merneptah stele, the nations that Merneptah is listing have a specific symbol next to them that that essentially shows that they are a nation, right? So there's a symbol that you put next to a name, and it is an identifier towards that name to say that they are a nation. But next to Israel, they don't have that symbol. Israel is the only quote unquote nation on that list that doesn't have that symbol that qualifies them as a nation. They have the symbol next to them that constitutes them as a people group, which has another big thing to say about Israel. They're not, at this point, really a nation with a constituted monarchy and walls and cities and all this stuff. They're just kind of like a nomadic people group on their way to this land, but they're a mighty enough force that they can take on Jericho, because assumingly Jericho has been defeated at this point. And like they had the 10 plagues and they were able to defeat Amalek, and all this stuff. So I didn't know if that was the steel one or not. There are a few of them that speak similarly, but it's like a sojourning nation, which is an something. It's really kind of hard to explain, like, because they work in different terminology than we do. So to say that they're that might even be better wording, sojourning nation. But yeah, Israel has a different symbol next to them than the rest of the nations that outs them as being different, which is really, really interesting. But yeah, like this is just one more qualifier to talk about Israel and its like legitimacy and its history, like just the way that Merneptah talks about it in this, document, this inscribed document, like, it's pretty cool. I wonder if oh yeah, this highlighted section I'm pretty sure is, biblical historical context. You can't see it because the thing's in the way. There we go. This box down here is probably where the Israel part is. If I search Israel itself, I might be able to... Oh yeah, this is it. I don't remember which of these was the one that... I think it might have been these two. I don't remember, but I vaguely remember this being the hieroglyphic for Israel. Vaguely. Um, let's see if there's any other pictures. I think I don't remember the significance. I've seen this one before, but I don't remember the significance of it. These might have been depictions of Israelites, maybe? I'm not sure. Yeah, this box down here, I'm assuming, is the part where Israel's mentioned, because all the boxes are around that part. Yeah, because this is the wording. Israel is wasted, its seed is not. Which we don't exactly know what this means. Like, we know the Israel is wasted part makes sense. We know what that means. But we don't know its seed is... We don't know what that its seed is not means. Like, that's how it literally translates. Like, it literally translates as its seed is not, but its seed is not it's probably like a phrasing, like a popular ancient phrasing that they had that we don't know the symbolic meaning of. Yeah, so here it is drawn out, so it's easier to see. But yeah, so that's the Merneptah stele. Oh, and then some other things before we get... I know there's a lot of stuff. We're having some fun today before we get started. Oh, wait. Since nations are tied to land and sojourners have no lands, it's it's like a mass kingdom that just goes anywhere and takes over everyone who opposes them. They have no walls, but they have no warrior training, but they have unparalleled offense. It was probably Purim we get it a little wasted on Purim, and 9 months from Purim usually leaves the seed. Oh, yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense for that last part. But yeah, so like the Israel we see in the Bible was not like an established nation until the time of like Saul and David, right? Like way later on. They were just kind of like this people group. You know, they were kind of nomadic. Like they kind of had land, kind of not. Like God promises them this land, but it takes them a while to get there. And like there's all this stuff. So like the Bible displays the Israelites as being very different than being a normal nation. And how Pharaoh Merneptah writes about them kind of, you know, like confirms that. Like the way Pharaoh Merneptah writes about them, he doesn't list them as a quote unquote nation, like with people and kingdom and walls and stuff like that. So I don't know. It's just another cool way of confirming a lot of things historically and archaeologically. So I did have some other things that I learned this past week to give more context to the book of Exodus. First of all, this is going way back to the Midianites, which the Midianites will be important again later on, but they won't be for a little while. But we have mentioned the Midianites, right? Moses fled to the land of Midian, and he married a Midianite woman. And the Midianite woman that he married, her father was the priest of Midian. And we believed from those interactions that he was a, you know, Israelite God worshiper. And we were saying that's weird because all the Israelites are in Egypt. So how is there another Israelite God worshiper? And I had speculated that the Midianites were descendants of Abraham, not from Isaac's line. Because Abraham had Isaac and Ishmael. We know they're not Ishmael's offspring because Ishmael's offspring are called the Ishmaelites, right? We saw them in the Joseph account when Joseph was sold into slavery. The Ishmaelites are mentioned, and the Ishmaelites became their own. Interestingly enough, the Ishmaelites were known to be 12 tribes as well that became slightly powerful, which confirms God's promise. You know, whenever whenever Abraham had Isaac, God promised that Ishmael would also become a great people. Which we see confirmed in that they become 12 tribes called the Ishmaelites. But after Isaac and Ishmael, and after Hagar and Sarah, Abraham married again to another woman. I forget her name right now. I don't remember what chapter she'd be in. I could look it up. But Abraham married a third time, and he had more children with her. So the assumption is that the assumption that I made was that the Midianites must have been descendants of her. Um, and I was actually reading a commentary this past week that mentioned that, and they actually had the same conclusion. So apparently, that's actually something that some scholars believe as well, is that the Midianites were descendants of Abraham's third wife, which I thought was really interesting because I didn't have any backing for that. I just thought, well, these people are worshiping the God of Abraham, and how else would they know about the God of Abraham if they're not descendants of Abraham? Because they couldn't have been descendants of Esau, because the descendants of Esau become the Edomites. Obviously, Jacob's descendants become the, Israelites, and so on and so forth. So I had, speculated on that, but I also found the commentary that also said the same thing. So it might actually be true. Obviously, it's not speculation, but still interesting to know nonetheless. So whenever we get to the Midianites again, that'll be something we can look forward to. Ah, I gotta drink water. Thank you. Thank you for reminding me to drink water. I'm going to need that after all this talking. Midrashim talk about Jethro was one of the advisors to Pharaoh, but when Pharaoh wanted to kill the firstborn, Jethro warned against it, and then went back to his home in Midian. Interesting. Moshe, upon knowing there was a Hebrew sympathizer who was friendly towards Egyptian royalty, then set out towards Midian. That's interesting. So if you guys don't know what Midrash is a Jewish tradition. Altus calls it Midrashim. I've always heard of it being called Midrash, which might just be a shortening of the term. But essentially, Jewish Midrash is a tradition in Jewish culture where they take the scriptures and they speculate upon things that can't really be known for fact. So it's kind of like taking the stories and adding to them things that are possible in their interpretations. But like clarifying, like obviously it's interpretation, it's guessing, it's not like for fact. Like one of the ones that we mentioned before, whenever I was talking about the book of Judges, there's a Jewish midrash that says the messenger of God in the book of Judges at the beginning of the book is not an angel, it's actually Phinehas, which Phinehas is one of the high priests of back in Deuteronomy. Which it's just interesting stuff. Midrash equals singular, Midrashim equals plural. Oh, okay. I didn't know that. Also, Michael, it's good to see you, man. Michael, glad that you're here. And Ace, hello, good to see you as well. Michael and Ace, thank you for joining us tonight. You're joining at a very good time. We've been talking about a bunch of other stuff with the book of Exodus. We were talking about pharaohs, and we were talking about the Midianites. And then I actually have one other thing that I was looking into. So I'll go over this really quickly. But essentially, I was talking to some of my professors on the campus about what we had just gone over. And actually, this might be some good segue into what we're talking about. So if you haven't been here for a little bit and you're wondering where we're at, so we're going through the book of Exodus, right? And so the book of Exodus, the Israelites are in captivity in Egypt. God sends the 10 plagues over Egypt so that the Israelites can go free. And then the Israelites are on their way from Egypt to the promised land. And during this travel, they end up at Mount Sinai, which most people should know Mount Sinai. Mount Sinai is essentially the place where the Israelites dwell while they meet with God to make the covenant with God. It's where God gives the 10 commandments to the Israelites. Which actually led into last week, right? So back in chapter 19, God says that the Israelites must consecrate themselves in order to come before God, which essentially means that they must be clean, they must be pure, all of this stuff in order to be in the presence of God. And once they are able to be in the presence of God, when the Lord descended upon Mount Sinai to the top of the mountain, the Lord summoned Moses to the top of the mountain, and Moses went up. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Go down and warn the people not to break through to the Lord to look, otherwise many of them will perish, because if they're not clean, they get too close to God. That God is, we were talking about it, God is like so amazing and so powerful and so great. Like if they have any bit of impurity on them, it's God will be too overpowering, and this isn't God saying like, hey, I'm gonna kill them. It's God saying like, hey, I'm coming, and like I'm just warning you that if they get too close, they're gonna die, kind of a deal. Um, Even the priests who approach the mountain must consecrate themselves, or the Lord will break out against them. Moses said to the Lord, the people are not permitted to come up to Mount Sinai, for you warned us, saying, set limits around the mountain. So then God speaks the Ten Commandments, right? So the Ten Commandments are the original law that God gives to the Israelites. And then when God gives these Ten Commandments, there's this paragraph here. And the people who witnessed the thunder and lightning and the sound of the trumpet and the mountain smoking, they were afraid and they trembled and stood at a distance. And they said to Moses, you speak to us and we will listen, but do not let God speak to us or we will die. Moses said, do not be afraid, for God has only come to test you and to put the fear of him upon you so that you do not sin. So the speculation surrounding this passage is that the original covenant that God set out was just going to be these 10 commandments, right? Because based on the flow of the passage, God says up here in chapter 19 that he's going to come and make a covenant with the people, so that if they listen to his law, he will bless them and make his holy people on the earth. So then God comes and he speaks these words, right? These 10 commandments. But when God speaks these 10 commandments, the people cower in fear away from them. So the idea is these, and this is speculation about the passage and why things fall out the way they do. I believe there's other ways of interpreting it, but the way that I have seen that's made sense to me is these 10 commandments were the original covenant from God, but when the people react with fear and they back away from wanting to follow the 10 commandments, God gives this preceding section called the moral law, which is the end of chapter 20, all of chapter 21, all of chapter 22, and the first half of chapter 23, which is what we did last week. And this has to do with festivals, the Sabbath, finding justice for all people, social and religious laws, and then, other things like restitution, like how are they going to give restitution, laws concerning property, laws concerning violence, stuff like this, like this is the moral law section of Exodus, right? So this is what we went through last week. And then, so essentially God gave the 10 commandments, the people cowered in fear and backed off. So then God gives moral laws so that they might not be so scared, they might be able to listen to it. And as we're going to see this week, the people will actually respond much better to these laws than they did to the 10 commandments. Just real quick so that I can show it to you. Right here, this is where we're going to get to today. Moses came and told all the people of the words and all the ordinance, and all the people answered with one voice and said, all the words that the Lord has spoken, we will do. Right, so the people respond much more favorably this time around than they did last time. The 10 are also a giant table of contents. Every law is related to the 10. Yeah, and that was what we talked about a couple weeks ago as well. Altus, I don't remember if it was you. I think it was you. It could have been Aristotle. One of you two had come by and you had mentioned this, which is what I had also talked about that as well, right? So like Jesus gives the two law in the New Testament, all of the law and the prophets hang upon the two laws: love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself, right? And the 10 Commandments are a further outstretch of the two laws that Jesus gave in the New Testament, right? The first 4 show you how to love God, and the other 6 show you how to love your neighbor. And then all of this rest of the law is further clarification on the 10 Commandments, right? So the sabbatical year and the Sabbath is further expansion on the 4th commandment, which is to take a Sabbath, right? And the sections on restitution are further law on do not steal. And then the laws concerning violence are further expansion on you shall not murder, stuff like that. But that's to say, I've heard the term moral law a lot, but it's never made sense to me. So Like Noahide law. So essentially, from what I understand, I'm new to this subject myself. It was actually just this past week that I was reading on it and talking to some professors about it. So I'm fairly new to the concept as well. But so forgive me. I'm a little bit new to this. I want to study it a bit further before I can like 100% say this. But from my current understanding, the idea is that you can take all of the law from Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy and split it into three distinct categories. Um, so the first one is the moral law, which is a lot of the stuff that was in this past section, right? Essentially, stuff that applies to all people of all nations for all times. Like, you shall not spread a false report. You shall not take a bribe. You shall not oppress a resident alien. You shall not pervert justice. You shall not revile God. Um, Gosh, like all this stuff when someone steals and when there's blood guilt and um, like the idea is the moral law is law that extends to all people of all times, regardless of nation or background or time period. And then there's the second section, which is the civil law, which is a lot of kind of like some of the Levitical law, which is laws that were specific to Israel in their cultural context surrounding the other nations, right? So stuff like, don't make a shirt out of two different types of material, or other types of stuff like that. Like that was civil law for Israel, which was for them to set them apart from the other nations, right? Because holy means set apart. And Israel was supposed to set itself apart from the secular nations nearby. And the stuff that the secular nations were doing nearby was stuff that God prohibits in the civil law. So it's not that those practices inherently were wrong, like making a shirt out of two different types of material. The idea is that doing stuff like that is what the secular cultures around them did, and therefore the Israelites should not do them so as to stand apart. So there's the moral law, which is for all places of all times, for all people. And then there's the civil law, which is specific law for the land of Israel in its cultural context. And then the third section of law is the ceremonial law, which we kind of touched on. And the ceremonial law has to do with the sacrificial system for atonement of sin. And the idea with the ceremonial law is what we were talking about a couple weeks ago, and that is that it is fulfilled in Jesus Christ. Right? So now that Jesus Christ has died on the cross and is in heaven, the book of Hebrews in the New Testament tells us that Christ's sacrifice is the atonement for our sins, and also Christ is the priest in heaven by God's side, forever interceding on our behalf. So the ceremonial law is then fulfilled within Jesus Christ and his sacrifice. So splitting up this Old Testament law, you can split it up into those three sections, like moral law for all people of all times and places, the civil law, which is specifically for the land of Israel, and within their cultural context to set them apart from the other nations, because that's a very, I think from what I understand, that's a very important distinction, right? Because you could say that all of these are specific to Israel and they don't apply to us, right? So then you have to ask, why is this law in place? Is it because it is a moral duty, right? Or is it a specific thing that other cultures around them did that were seen as bad? Is there something other nations did with wool and linen that made it bad? I don't know about that one specifically. I'd want to look into it more. It was just the first one that came to mind. But actually, you know what? I think I did see something about it, and that's why it came to mind. I think there was something about pagan priests wearing garment of wool and linen or something like that. I think I did see something actually. I don't know. There was a lot of stuff that I was reading and looking into about this past week. Um, so if all laws are how to love God and how to love neighbor, then the only laws that stay are how to love neighbor, but all the love God laws are ceremonial and no longer relevant except for belief in God. Wait. So if all laws are how to love God and how to love neighbor, then the only laws that stay are how to love neighbor, but all the love God laws are ceremonial and no longer relevant except for belief in God. Well, no. No, not like that. It wouldn't be like that, right? So let's go back up here. Like, just pull a couple examples from our section from last week, right? The law concerning the altar. Moses said then the Lord said to Moses, "Thus you shall say to the Israelites, you have seen for yourselves that I spoke with you from heaven. You shall not make gods of silver alongside me, nor shall you make for yourself gods of gold." Right? So the idea is this is moral law that applies to all people of all time. So there is law that extends to God, how to love God in moral law sections. What love neighbor law is no longer relevant? I don't think that there would be any love neighbor laws that are no longer relevant. That's why they're moral laws. Is do not eat pig how to love God or love neighbor? Well, that's what I'm saying, right? Do not eat pig, what would have been a civil law for Israel, right? Because that's what the pagans did. They ate pig and stuff like that, right? Pig was a common sacrifice among the other nations to their gods. The only laws which are done away with are how to love God. Well, not all of them, right? Because there's like these ones here. You shall not make a god of silver or alongside me. And then going back to the Sabbath, right? The Sabbath is how to love God and technically how to love others as well. But it's also how to love God, right? Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and I'll do all your work, but on the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. And in the moral law section down here, we have more about how to practice Sabbath down here in 23, right? For 6 years you shall sow, 6 days you shall do all your work, stuff like that. That's what I'm saying. The only law. Oh, okay. So I think I get what you're saying. So, So are you saying that in the sense of I'm trying to think like the ceremonial laws specifically have to deal every love neighbor law is relevant, but not all love God laws are relevant. Well, I guess it's hard to break it down to just that, I feel like. Maybe it is. Maybe I'm not seeing it, and maybe it is easy to break it down to that, but I'm not seeing it right now. Because there is no separation of ceremonial, civil, or moral in Scripture or Judaism. Yeah, in Judaism there's not. And in Scripture specifically, it is. Well, there is some separation in that, like, this section here, the only law in Exodus is in this section here. Right? The only law in Exodus is chapters 20 to 23. And these would be considered moral law, like for all people of all times. And then the Levitical law has to do more with the ceremonial law and the sacrificial system, and everything like that. So there's kind of divisions within the books themselves. Not exactly. But in a sense. Where is it called moral law or all-time law? Well, it's those terms aren't used in the Bible, but it doesn't mean that we can't use them as Christians. Like the word Trinity is never used in the Bible, but it doesn't mean that it's not an important term. I have to pick and choose between what is moral and civil. I don't think it's just picking and choosing what you like. I don't think it's just as simple as just picking. Be set apart, for I am set apart. But you are saying we no longer need to be set apart because that was civil ceremonial. No, it's that there's different like they did things that set them apart from the nations surrounding them at that particular time. Like that's seen all throughout the Bible, right? God calls the Israelites not to do specific things because the pagan nations surrounding them were doing those things and it made them seem pagan, right? And Paul does the exact same thing. Paul tells the Christians to not do specific things in specific cities that he doesn't command elsewhere because it would make them seem pagan in those specific areas. But Paul doesn't make those specific commands to all Christians. He just makes some, well, I mean, some commands he makes for all Christians, but there's also, even in Paul's own New Testament writings, there are some things that he commands for a specific people of a specific place because what command did he make for only one area? Greet your fellow person with a holy kiss. That's just one example of a command he made for only one area, because he was writing to a church that was very, very divided, and he was trying to reconcile the divisions among the Christians in that area. So he said that all of the men of the church should greet each other with a holy kiss. We don't do that today. That was a Jewish practice everyone did, but he didn't command all churches to do it, is my point. He didn't command all churches to do it. I mean, I don't know what you want me to. I don't think. Local custom. Well, yeah, it's a local custom. That's the point that I'm trying to make. It's a local custom. So let me ask this then. But Scripture isn't a local custom. But Scripture contains local customs. We can't, like, we don't follow absolutely everything in the Bible as told to every person. Like, we don't greet each other with a holy kiss, but that's Scripture. Right? That's Scripture, but we don't greet each other with a holy kiss. But that's not a Torah law. So let me ask you this then. Where would you divide the law then? Rabbinic law can change, Torah law cannot. Okay, but I still want to ask, where would you divide the law then? Like, as a Christian, Torah is the 613 laws. They can't change. But you were already talking about how some of the law is not followed, right? So where would you make the division of laws that should continue to be followed and which ones shouldn't? Because it seems clearly you're making a distinction as well. So maybe our difference is coming from that you make a different separation than I would. So do you still make altars and sacrifice animals on them? Because that would be within the 613 laws. So if there's no division and all 613 laws are relevant for all time, then clearly you would be sacrificing animals for the atonement of sin. Not sacrifice unless there is a temple and an altar. So then how do you get atonement for your sin? –
What's stopping you from making one?
So like if your argument is that you have to be in the land of God in the temple to make the sacrifices, then like what about the displaced Jews during the exile? Right? Like they same way as it has always been, repentance. But I think that's still missing the point that we don't follow all the. There was no temple or sacrifices between the first and second temple. I know there wouldn't have been. Was there no atonement for any Jew? Well, that's what I'm saying, right? If all 613 laws are for all time, the Levitical law makes it clear that the atonement comes from the sacrifices. So clearly, there had to be developments in the law, even within the Old Testament, to deal with the fact that they couldn't practice the law to its full extent. Like even before the New Testament, even before the New Covenant with Jesus Christ, there would have still been developments within the Old Testament itself on how to practice within the law of Moses, right? And forgive me, I'm still parsing this out for myself as well, but I feel like I mean just even talking like let's get rid of the moral law, ceremonial law, civil law, like we'll just forget about all of that for the time being. I don't see what you would do with the book of Hebrews. Right? Like the book of Hebrews makes it clear that the ceremonial law is now fulfilled in Jesus Christ, right? Like, and that is an alteration of the Levitical law, right? Oh, Kodo. It's good to see you, Kodo. It's good to see you, man. So I'm trying to work out, like, as a Christian, right? Obviously, this would be different between a Jew and a Christian. But as a Christian, the book of Hebrews makes clear that there is at least an alteration of the 613 law, in that the ceremonial law would now be fulfilled. Well, let's get rid of the ceremonial terming. The sacrificial atonement for sin system would have been fulfilled in Christ. No, it's dependence. For example, I'm not breaking the law because I don't walk into the Holy of Holies. It's if I'm a high priest, then I can do that. Likewise, if there's a temple, then sacrifices resume, which when even Ezekiel talks about in the Messianic era, sacrifices will resume. Okay, well, so I would see the Ezekiel prophecies having to do with, well, that might be getting too far off topic. But I mean, that's an interesting way of looking at it. I would want to look in, like, Altus, do you have on mind, like on hand, a book or an article or something I could read on this? I mean, it's interesting what you're saying. I'd like to read more on it. I haven't really heard this before, so I'd like to read. If you have like a book or something in mind, that you have on hand, and you can send that to me, I'd love to read more on it. Because I mean, like I'm following your train of thought, and part of me is playing devil's advocate. Part of me is really standing by what I'm saying, but it's interesting. It's interesting way of thinking about it. So I would like to think about it more. If you have a book or something in mind. So, well, I don't have a book recommendation, sadly, but want to play devil's advocate in voice chat. Well, I'd love to, after stream, if you would want to. Well, I'm not sure how much time I'll have after stream, but if I have time after stream, I'd love to. Unfortunately, I will have to get to the actual Bible study. I will have to actually get to the chapters for today at some point. I mean, I've been really enjoying this conversation, and from the sounds of it, other people have as well. So I do. That is good to hear. I'm glad that it wasn't just me enjoying this conversation, and that others were as well. But I did make a promise that we'll get to this actual study as well. So. Sounds good. If there's time, I'd love to, man. I would absolutely love to. Like, this is the type of stuff that I do this. Well, that's not entirely true. I do this Bible study because I really feel like God has led me to do it. As I've been in prayer and everything, I really feel like I really feel like God was leading me and my friends to do this. But as we have been faithful to doing that, I have found that one of the parts I enjoy the most about doing this is hearing other perspectives and wrestling with them. Like, I really love to hear the different perspectives on this kind of stuff and wrestle with it and talk to people of different backgrounds, and I really love it. Fight a tooth and nail, debating for Jews is a form of worship. Okay, yeah. It's seeking truth with heart, mind, soul, and passion, and two people sharpening iron. Yeah. I see it, man. I see it. And I guess, like to clarify, I think just to like wrap it up real quick in a short summary statement, I think a lot of the law, like the vast majority of it, would have to do either with, like, in pretty much all the book of Leviticus, a lot of it is just to do with the sacrificial system, right? And I believe, as the book of Hebrews says, that the sacrificial system is now fulfilled in Christ and his sacrifice, and he's now the priest. So everything to do with the sacrificial system itself, I would believe, is fulfilled now through Christ's sacrifice. Whereas I find most of the rest of the law would fulfill the moral law. I think whenever I talk about the civil law specifically, that would be a very, very, very small piece of law that would be within that, right? Like, all the section we just went over, I believe that all of this is moral law for all people of all places. Obviously, like, there's nuance, like we had talked about with the slaves. Obviously, we don't have slaves anymore, and even though this law concerning slaves was super counter cultural to the time, and this was a way of getting rid of the system over time, we don't have slaves anymore, clearly. So, like, that would be something we'd have to do different. But overall, like, this all being moral law or ceremonial law, ceremonial law being fulfilled in Christ, and then the moral law being for all people of all times. I find that well, I guess that'll start. I said I'd wrap it up, so I'll end on that. I'll be right back. Let's riff later for sure. Yeah, absolutely, man. Absolutely. I mean, it's been good to talk. No hard feelings. I mean, like I said, I have fun doing this. I have absolutely no hard feelings. This is the stuff that I enjoy to do. So hopefully there's no hard feelings on your end either. This was all friendly for me. So 100%, I just have fun. Okay, that's good to hear. That's good to hear. Absolutely, man. Just wanted to make sure. You can never tell all the time on the internet how someone's feeling on the other side. So, absolutely, no hard. I'm having a good time with this. So, and I hope everybody else was having a good time too. Sounds like it was. So, absolutely. So that we can actually get. I mean, it's actually kind of good that we filled this time with something else as well. Tones don't cafe over chat. Yeah, exactly. Tones don't cafe over chat. But yeah, man. Well, we can get it. We can talk about it sometime. Absolutely. So it is actually pretty good that we filled this time with something, anyways, because the section for today is fairly short, actually. So it's pretty good that we had some other stuff to fill in this time. I find, at least. So But yeah, absolutely, man. Now, from now on, whenever I see your voice, I'll imagine it as Kermit the Frog. I love it, man. Well, yeah. If you got to get going, be right back. Then absolutely, man. Hopefully we'll get to talk in a bit. But yeah, so if you guys want, real quick, now that we are into the actual Bible study portion for this week, if you guys will join me in prayer, real quick. So real quick, let's go to Lord in prayer. Father in heaven, thank you so much for today. Thank you so much for it. Thank you for a good conversation. Even just over this last little bit of time before we get into the Bible study, I feel like we've had really good conversation, and thank you for being here. Thank you for friendly conversation, for some good fellowship with some good people, being able to talk about history and archaeology and New Testament, Old Testament, narrative, all this stuff. It's been really good. Thank you so much for this conversation and for being able to do this. I pray that everybody's been blessed by this conversation as much as I have. And I pray as we go into our section for today, that you will also bless this conversation, that you will meet us here amidst it, that you will speak through me, speak through everyone else, that we can have good conversation, that everything we say would be honoring unto you and to your name. I pray this would be a place where your kingdom is furthered on this earth, and that we can all have a good time fellowshipping with one another, and that every person here will learn something new. Pray all of these things in your name. Amen. All right, so gonna do it as we normally do. I'm gonna read through our passage all the way through, and then we can get talking about it. So if you want to read along with me, we're gonna be doing Exodus chapter 23 all the way to the end of chapter 24. So it's a little bit shorter. Essentially, this is going to seal the covenant today. So we went over the law section. The Israelites came to Sinai. Chapter 19, they were consecrated. God gave the 10 commandments in chapter 20, and then he expanded upon the 10 commandments in chapters 21, 22, 23, and now in chapter 24, the covenant is going to be sealed, and officially, God is going to be their Lord, their ruler over their nation. And the people of Israel are going to be a set-apart nation, a set-apart people, God's people, and they are going to follow, hopefully, the law that God has set forth in the past 3 chapters. And also, Kodo, thank you so much for reminding me to drink. I appreciate that.
What website are you using?
Sorry, what was that?
What website are you using?
So I'm using Logos, which, if you don't know what Logos is, it's it's a free Bible study software, but it has resources that you can buy. For example, up here on the top, you can see the resources. So the NRSV and the ESV are just different translations of the Bible. The English Standard Version and the New Revised Standard Version. I'm using the NRSV for our Old Testament Bible study, and I'm using the ESV currently for my Acts work. This atlas is a free atlas that comes with the software, but these two, I have these two here. I'll line them up so they're in order. This is my Hebrew Bible here, which I can kind of read, kind of not. Like, I can pick out words here and there, but I can't straight up read it, so I have to have some tools and stuff. And then this is my Greek New Testament, so I'm trying to use this as I go through Acts as well. I'm not super proficient, but I can, with the tools that this website provides, I can do a lot of translation. So I have these two pulled up, but you can also buy commentaries and stuff. Like if I pull this up, these are a lot of these are free that come with it. I've bought a couple, but there's, I guess you guys can't see it, it's a little bit off screen, but actually now you should be able to see it. A lot of these, the vast majority of these came with the website itself, but this is the Matthew Henry's one that I use quite a bit. It's outdated, so it's like public domain stuff now, but it's still a really good one. Some of these are just books. Some of these are Bible translations. This is a topical Bible, New Testament in Greek, in the original Greek. There's some atlases in here. There's some stuff. This is Spanish. Here's Pilgrim's Progress. So there's everything you can possibly find on here. And then you can go to the store and like buy new resources and whatnot. Pretty much any biblical resource you can think of is on here. And the benefit of using logos specifically is that, you know, if I go to do a word search here, study, it's going to pull from all of my resources that have this word to supply the information. So it's really nice how it kind of all ties together. But it's a useful resource. And logos, maybe some of you guys know this, maybe some of you don't. The reason it's called logos is because logos in Greek is word, right? So whenever, actually, I can pull it up. Actually, I'll do it on the ESV so you guys can see the interlinear. If I go to John 1 and I pull up the Greek inline, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Logos is the word that is used for word. So logos is the Greek term here, which obviously Greek is interesting because half of the letters in their alphabet are exactly the same as English, and half of them are completely different. So this is K-A-I. It's pronounced Ke, because A-I. So A actually does make an A sound, and I makes an I sound, but whenever an A and I are together, it makes an E, so it's Ke. But technically, it's an A and an I, like an English A and I. And then O, English and Greek make the exact same O sound, so that's why this is logos. But the L looks like that, the G looks like that, and the S looks like that. So, yeah, Greek is interesting. But yeah, if you want to read along in your own translation, I'll go back over here to Exodus. We're going to start here in verse 20, and we're going to go all the way to the end of chapter 24, if you have your own, or you can read along with me. So starting here, I am going to send an angel in front of you to guard you on the way and to bring you to the place that I have prepared. Be attentive to him and listen to his voice. Do not rebel against him, for he will not pardon your transgression, for my name is in him. But if you listen attentively to his voice and do all that I say, then I will be an enemy to your enemies and a foe to your foes. When my angel goes in front of you and brings you to the Ammonites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Canaanites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, and I blot them out, you shall not bow down to their gods or worship them or follow their practices, but you shall utterly demolish them and break their pillars in pieces. You shall worship the Lord your God, and I will bless your bread and your water, and I will take sickness away from you. No one shall miscarry or be barren in your land. I will fulfill the number of your days. I will send my terror in front of you, and I will throw into confusion all the people against whom you shall come, and I will make all your enemies turn their backs to you. And I will send the pestilence in front of you, which will drive out the Hivites, the Canaanites, and the Hittites from before you. I will not drive them out from before you in 1 year, or the land would become desolate, and the wild animals would multiply against you. Little by little I will drive them out from before you, until you have increased and possessed the land. I will set your borders from the Red Sea to the Sea of the Philistines, and from the wilderness to the Euphrates. For I will hand over to you the inhabitants of the land, and you shall drive them out from before you. You shall make no covenant with them and their gods. They shall not live in your land, or they will make you sin against me. For if you worship their gods, it will surely be a snare to you. Then he said to Moses, Come up to the Lord, you and Aaron, Nadab, and Abihu, and 70 of the elders of Israel, and worship at a distance. Moses alone shall come near to the Lord, but the others shall not come near, and the people shall not come up with him. Moses came and told the people all the words of the Lord and all the ordinances, and all the people answered with one voice and said, All the words that the Lord has spoken we will do. And Moses wrote down all the words of the Lord. He rose early in the morning and built an altar at the foot of the mountain, and set up 12 pillars, corresponding to the 12 tribes of Israel. He sent young men of the people of Israel who offered burnt offerings and sacrificed oxen as offerings of well-being to the Lord. Moses took half of the blood and put it in basins, and half of the blood he dashed against the altar. Then he took the book of the covenant and read it in the hearing of the people. And they said, All that the Lord has spoken we will do, and we will be obedient. Moses took the blood and dashed it on the people and said, See the blood of the covenant that the Lord has made with you in accordance with all these words. Then Moses and Aaron, Nadab and Abihu, and 70 of the elders of Israel went up, and they saw God, the God of Israel. Under his feet there was something like a pavement of sapphire stone, like the very heaven for clearness. God did not lay his hand on the chief men of the people of Israel. Also, they beheld God, and they ate and drank. The Lord said to Moses, Come up to me on the mountain and wait there, and I will give you the tablets of stone, with the law and commandment, which I have written for their instruction. So Moses set out with his assistant Joshua, and Moses went up into the mountain of God to the elders. And he said, Wait for us until we come to you again, for Aaron and Hur are with you. Whoever has a dispute may go with them. Then Moses went up on the mountain, and the cloud covered the mountain. The glory of the Lord settled on Mount Sinai, and the cloud covered it for 6 days. On the 7th day he called out to Moses out of the cloud. Now the appearance of the glory of the Lord was like a devouring fire on the top of the mountain in the sight of the people of Israel. Moses entered the cloud and went up the mountain. Moses was on the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights. All right, so that's our passage for the week. Kind of a conclusion to this section of the book. As I was saying previously, it appears to me, and I saw some other, I was reading some commentaries as well on this, as usual, and kind of I've come to the conclusion after reading through this and with the commentaries that this book is kind of split into 3 major distinct sections. So essentially, Exodus 1 to 18 have to deal with God delivering the Israelites out of their slavery in Egypt. Exodus 19 to 24, the section that we just finished today, has to do with God creating the covenant with the people, establishing the law and the 10 Commandments with them, and then officially creating the contract with them. And then the final section that we're going to get into here in chapter 25, 25 to 40 are going to have to deal with the temple creation and all the stuff that goes along with it. So there's going to be the offerings to the temple, the Ark of the Covenant, all the stuff that goes in it, stuff like that is what we're going to get into for the rest of this book. But for our section for today, ending off this, capping off this second major section of Exodus, any questions, comments, concerns, anything that comes to mind that you guys want to talk about?
How many times does 40 come up in the Bible at this point?
It's not going to stop. I can tell you that.
Trying to think of what number we're at right now. At least more than one.
Way more than one. Definitely more than one. It's funny if you.
Because Noah was before this. Is there anything that happened between the Ark and this?
So there was the Ark. Well, the Israelites are going to be in the wilderness for 40 years, coming up here in a little bit. I'm trying to think of what else there was. There might have been something about Moses and Midian for. No, I feel like there was something else. I don't remember what it is right now, but I feel like there was another one. Could have been Joseph's travels or Moses' travels or something was 40 days. But it is interesting. I mean, it's symbolic. So like the numbers that are always used in the Bible are 7, 10, 12, 40. Typically, those are the numbers that are always used in the Bible, typically. And so a lot of those numbers have symbolic significance to the ancient people. I don't remember exactly what they all mean. I remember that 7 to them meant completion. So anytime you see 7, it has to deal with something being complete or finished. So that's why it's 7 days in a week. That's why it's the Sabbath is the final day of creation. Typically, anything dealing with the number 7 has to do with it being complete. I don't know the symbolic significance of the other numbers off the top of my head, but I believe they also have a significance to them as well. 20 is also a number that is used fairly frequently. Not as frequently as 40. 40 is definitely a much more of a comprehensive number. Like a lot of the numbers in Judges, the people are going to be free in Judges for 40 years. The Israelites are going to be in the wilderness for 40 years. 40 years is a big one. I don't remember the symbolic significance behind it, though. But yeah, 40. Another 40.
Chalk that one up, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Reset the clock.
Yeah, getting there. We'll see how many weeks it takes for us to get to the next 40. Probably not terribly long, but But yeah, I mean, there's definitely some stuff we can comment on going through there if there's no other questions, comments, anything like that. Um, so as we had talked about, so covenant, we think of covenant nowadays as like, oh, that's just a religious thing, like an ancient religious thing. It's it is, but we need to like really understand what it meant because it wasn't just a religious thing. It was like really truly the best modern day equivalent would be a contract. Like
Or a promise.
yeah, like a promise. Like nations could enter into covenant with each other, like individuals could enter into covenant with each other, like anybody could enter into covenant with each other. And it was like a sealed promise, like a contract, right? And like there was rituals that went behind a covenant in the same way that there are rituals that go behind a contract, right? Like they had it that a promise would be made in that one party comes forward with their claims, and then the other party comes forward with their claims, and then at the very end, the covenant is sealed with blood. And that's why we see here at the end the blood of the covenant section, where the blood is like a super symbolic thing. We look at that now and we're like, oh, that's like gross and weird, which, yeah, but also that's how they did it in ancient times. Like, there was a number of ways that they did it. Like one of the ways that we see in like movies and stuff is like you cut your hand and you like I don't think they actually joined hands. I think they like put their wrists together like this, and then the blood would go on their wrist. I don't know that for sure. I think I heard that somewhere, but I know that was one of them. They would cut their hand, and that would be the blood. Sometimes they could make like an altar and sacrifice an animal on it, and that would be the symbolic blood for the covenant. Other times they would have a meal, like they'd kill an animal and they'd eat the animal together, and then the blood of that animal would seal the covenant. But no matter what, the covenant would have to be finalized with a some form of blood, whether like it was an animal that was killed or like if it was a person have like giving some of their own blood from their hands or whatever. It was always sealed in blood. That's just how they did it. Like think of it in the same like if we're going along with the contract analogy, like a covenant being an ancient day contract, or a contract being a modern day equivalent to a covenant. We end a contract with a signature from both parties, right? And that finalizes that everything in the contract is ratified and agreed upon by both parties. And it's kind of the same thing with like the blood. Like one party says something, the other party says something, and it's not ratified. It's not put into practice until there has been, some kind of blood spilt. So that's why there's this kind of section here with the blood. I don't remember why I was saying that. There was a reason I was saying that, but I don't remember now. Anyways, I guess it's still important to know. But so oh yeah, so going along with this being like with the ancient day covenant, because it wasn't like covenant wasn't something established by God for the Israelites and for the Bible, right? Covenant was a cultural thing that everybody knew about in the same way that everybody here in the modern day knows what a contract. Like you go up to anybody and ask them what a contract is, they're like, "Oh yeah, a contract." You sign the thing and whatever you signed on is like legal, right? Like everybody knew what a covenant was, right? So God is meeting the Israelites in a context that they understand, right? And speaking to them through that way, right? It would be like if God came to you or me today and he spoke from heaven to us in Hebrew. Like we wouldn't understand him. He would speak to us in English, right? Because that's a cultural form that we understand, right? So God not only speaks to us in a language that we understand, he speaks to us in cultural ways that we understand as well. So he speaks to them through the form of a covenant contract that they understand. And a hint going forward, I'll talk about this way more later, but the tabernacle, right? The tabernacle that they're going to be building, which is going to be the tent that the high priests go into in order to meet with God, is actually a well, not one to one, but a basically one to one recreation of Pharaoh's war tent. And we didn't know this until however recently, but there was a scholar who was looking at the tabernacle instructions and how to build it. And as he was trying to recreate the tabernacle on a scale model based on the instructions from the Old Testament, he realized that the instructions for the tabernacle were actually incomplete. In that, if you just used these descriptions for the tabernacle building presented in Exodus, you wouldn't know how to build the tabernacle. And he said, that's odd. And as he reasoned through it, he realized that there must have been an ancient day equivalent that they were basing it on. And the specific instructions that are given in the Old Testament are specific nuances for that specific tabernacle, right? Like, think about it this way. Like, if I walked up to an architect and I said I wanted a house built, and I said I want this room to look like that and this room to look like this and that and so forth, that wouldn't be instructions for plumbing or wiring or anything like that. That's just stuff that the construction worker knows how to do. And he's able to build the house based on his knowledge of how to build a house, plus the specific instructions that I have given of how I want the house to look. And the tabernacle was the same thing. So this scholar, he realizes that the tabernacle instructions are incomplete, and he starts looking at other ancient day buildings and tents and stuff like that. And he comes across in Egypt that Pharaoh had a war tent that we actually know what it looked like based on, pictures and hieroglyphics and stuff like that. And we find that it looks identical to the tabernacle. And the idea is that the Israelites would have known what Pharaoh's tent looked like, and they were able to build their tabernacle off of that, plus the instructions that God gave, right? So this is another example of God meeting people in forms and customs that they understand. And in this covenant, right, the way that covenants are done back in the ancient times is that the higher authority, the higher power, whatever it was, whether it was a king over another vassal nation, or whether it was like a father over, like a son-in-law or whatever it is, right? Like we saw that in the end of the book of Genesis with Laban and his son-in-law Jacob, right? They made a covenant with each other, right? So Laban would have been the higher power in that covenant, right? So the higher power speaks first and gives their instruction for the lower power. And then after that, the higher power will tell the lower power what they will provide for the lower power if the lower power fulfills the higher power's request. And that's exactly how we see it laid out in this covenant, right? God first meets them and he introduces himself, right? We see that up here in the start of the Ten Commandments, right? This is exactly how an ancient covenant would have started, by the first party introducing themselves and saying their relationship to the lower party, right? So I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt and out of the house of slavery, right? That is how the ancient covenants would have been started. An introduction of the person and then a statement of the relationship between the two parties. And then the higher power would have said what they expect of the lower power, which we see from here in verse 3 all the way down, with this interjection from the Israelites here in this paragraph, this one here, with this little interjection. Other than that little interjection, from verse 3 up here, all the way through to what we just read last week, here in chapter 23 at the end of the annual festivals, right? This is what God is requesting of the Israelites, and this is what the higher power would be requesting of the lower power. And then at the very end, the higher power says what he will do for the lower power if they follow, if they hold up their end of the bargain, which is exactly what we see here at the beginning of this section, which is the conquest of Canaan, right? In here, verse 20, all the way down here to 33, this is God, right? I will send an angel in front of you to guard you on your way to the place that I have prepared. Be attentive to his voice. When my angel goes in front of you and brings you to the land of these people, I will blot them out. You will not bow down to their gods, but you will utterly destroy them. You shall worship me, and I will give you this land. Right? This is the what God is going to give to them if they listen to what he says. Right? And then, after this has all been done, the covenant is then sealed in blood to say that both parties will hold up their end of the bargain, right? So we get this in the blood of the covenant section. Then God said to Moses, "Come up to the Lord, you and Aaron, Nadab and Abihu." So Aaron, Moses' brother, and then Nadab and Abihu, which I believe are going to be two of the Levitical priests. We haven't been officially introduced to them yet, but they're mentioned here. I believe that in the future they're going to be introduced as priests. I believe. Actually, I can do a quick search on them. Yeah, so it looks like Nadab and Abihu were mentioned here in Exodus 6, actually. What was this passage? Now I'm curious. Exodus 6, what was it again? 6:23. Oh, this is the genealogy. So they're just mentioned in the genealogy. Aaron took as his wife Eliza, the daughter of the sister of, and she bore for him. Okay, so Nadab and Abihu are two of Aaron's sons. Okay, sorry, I did know that. I forgot about it though. So Nadab and Abihu are two of Aaron's sons, as introduced in this genealogy. So they have been mentioned before, but just briefly in this genealogy of Moses and Aaron. This is the first time that they're actually being mentioned in the narrative here in our passage for today. Come up Aaron, Nadab, and Abihu, right? And the significance of this will be, now that I remember who they are, these two will be introduced later on as important figures. They haven't been introduced as important figures yet. So in due time, the Levite tribe, right? Levi was one of the 12 sons of Jacob, and the Levite sons, the tribe of Levi, will be chosen by God to be the priestly tribe. And Aaron and Moses are both Levites from the tribe. Aaron will be appointed as high priest, and then Nadab and Abihu, being his sons, will be part of the high priesthood. I remember who they are now. Yeah, sorry, I needed to look that up. So this is when, so the law has been given. God calls to Moses, "Come up to me with Aaron and his two sons and 70 of the elders of Israel and worship at a distance. Moses alone shall come near the Lord, but the others shall not come near, and the people shall not come up with him." Moses came and told all the people all the words of the Lord and all the ordinances, and all the people answered with one voice and said, "All the words that the Lord has spoken we will do." So the people have clarified. They're like, "We will listen," which is in stark contrast to what we saw last time, right? Up here in chapter 20. So God gives the 10 Commandments, which is the initial first law, right? We speculated that potentially the 10 Commandments would be the only law that God would give for the covenant. But whenever God gives the 10 Commandments, the people witness it. They're afraid. They trembled, stood at a distance, and said to Moses, "You will speak to us, and we will listen, but do not let God speak to us, or we will die." Moses says, "Don't be afraid." But the people continued to stand at a distance and drew away from God. Right? So that is why we believe God gave the rest of this law here in Exodus, is to expand upon the law, to make the people less afraid, to make it seem more doable for the Israelites. And now that the Israelites have seen these extra sections of law, they are now comfortable with the law that God has said. And this time, the last time they responded in fear and backed away, but this time they answer in one voice and they say, all the words that the Lord has spoken, we will do. Right? So Moses wrote down all the words of the Lord, and he rose early in the morning and built an altar at the foot of the mountain. He set up 12 pillars corresponding to the 12 tribes of Israel. Right? So one pillar being built for each tribe so that each tribe can clarify or be part of this covenant, right? So he sent young people of the men of Israel who burnt offerings and sacrificed oxen as offerings of well-being to the Lord, right? So he set up these 12 altars, one for each tribe, and then the ox is sacrificed as an offering of well-being on each of the 12 altars. So essentially this is symbolic of saying that all of the 12 tribes have said that they will enter into this covenant with God, right? The blood is being shed on all 12 altars, and all 12 altars will be, all 12 tribes have sealed in blood with God that they will hold up their end of the bargain by following what God has said. And it's so what's interesting here, and we'll talk about this again later on, but just real quickly. So there's a reason that they are being burnt, specifically on these altars. So with Abraham, right, the animal was cut in two, and then it was just like it wasn't burnt or anything, and that was enough for it to count as blood because it was in this vision with God, being there with Abraham in conversation, right? But this time God is up on the mountain, right, up in heaven, right? Because the ancient people believed heaven was like literally up there, like literally physically in the sky, right? And God is up on the mountain coming down to them. So this is why the Israelites were commanded to burn their offerings to God. So think about this. Whenever you burn an offering, the blood goes up in smoke to heaven. So the idea is when you burnt, this is how the ancient people would have seen it, and the Israelites would have seen it the same way. When you burn the offering, the smoke goes up to heaven and reaches God. Right? So the same thing here, right? The blood that is sealing the covenant, they're burning it so that the smoke goes up to heaven and reaches God. So in that way, the blood of the covenant is sealing it, and both parties are a part of it. And then to clarify even further, Moses took half of the blood and put it in the basins, and half of the blood he dashed across against the altar. Right? So this is further with the blood sealing the deal, sealing the covenant. It's set in stone. It's a contract. It's sealed. Both partners are going to follow it. And the blood here is clarifying that even further. So half of the blood is dashed against the altar, the altars that are built. And then he took the book of the covenant, what he wrote down, right? So Moses wrote down all the words of the Lord whenever he was on the mountain. And then he comes down with the book of the covenant and he reads it in front of the people. And once again, the people say in unison, all that the Lord has spoken, we will do. So twice now they have said it. All the words that the Lord has spoken, we will do, up here in verse 3. And then down here in verse 7, all that the Lord has spoken, we will do. And this time they add, we will be obedient. And then this is the gross part, but this is cultural. This is what they did culturally, even though it's really gross. Moses took the second half of the blood that was in the basins, and he dashed it upon the people. And Moses then says, see the blood of the covenant that the Lord has made with you in accordance with all these words. It's really gross. It's really gross. But yeah.
Not the grossest thing that's going on right now.
That's true. It's not the grossest thing that's going on.
Definitely in chat.
Oh gosh. Cole, you can't just out Molly like that, man. There's people here. There's people here. I guess that's really good timing, I guess. But so yeah, with the blood, right?
I guess if they consented to it, it's fine.
I mean, they did consent to it.
Well, then it's fine.
Yeah, that's just that's how they did it. I don't that's I don't I mean, I kind of get it culturally, but it is really gross to us today. But yeah, so that's how they did it. Half the blood was dashed across the altars for God to go up and smoke to heaven, right? Like we were saying, they're being burnt so that the smoke can go up to heaven. So that's why the blood's being dashed on the altars for half of it, and then the other half is being put on the people. So the covenant is sealed because both parties have had the blood, and that's how they sealed the covenant. Like how we were saying with the contract analogy, right? One party says what they want, the other party says what they want, and then you sign at the very end of the contract and it's sealed legally. Same thing with the covenant. That's how they saw it back then. One party says what they want, the other party gets what they get from it, and then instead of having a signed legal document, it was sealed in blood. That's how they did it. So yeah, it's gross, but that's how they did it here at Sinai. Joe, how is it going? Well, should I call you Fate? Should I call you Joe? It's good to see you, man. It's good to see you. I'm glad that you're here. Hopefully you've been blessed by this conversation. Do you have a different name you'd rather me call you? Or should I call you Fate? Should I call you Joe? It's good to see you. We're about halfway through the Bible study so far. Joe is fine? Okay, I'll call you Joe then. It's good to see you. I don't know how long you've been here, but we're doing Exodus chapter... we started here in verse 20 on chapter 23, verse 20, and we're going all the way to the end of chapter 24. So essentially this section today is sealing the covenant at Mount Sinai between God and the Israelites. So this is the blood part with the analogy we're just talking about. So the blood was like the signatures for the contract. The blood sealed the covenant. In ancient times, that's how they sealed covenants. Because covenant isn't specifically like a biblical thing between God and humanity. Covenant was actually something that anybody could do. So Laban and Jacob in the Old Testament, they entered into a covenant with one another. So like a king could enter into covenant with a nation. Two people could enter into covenant with each other. So it was like a cultural form back then. And they were always unanimously sealed with blood. Whether it was like an animal offering or like a meal of a dead animal, something like that. So, like honestly, Blood Brothers is a really good analogy. Blood Brothers is a really, really good analogy. Like, you agree on whatever, like two parties agree on something, and then blood seals it. And like we believe there were examples of covenant back then where, like we were saying this earlier, obviously it's not like proven, but we believe from documents and stuff that there was a form of covenant where the two parties would like slit their hand and like shake hands or put their hands on each other's wrists like this or something like that. So like kind of like how we see in like movies like Blood Brothers and stuff like that. It's not. I don't think it's a proven form, but I think there's like a idea that was another way. But there had to be some form of blood, like an animal was killed, or there was a meal of like they killed a cow and ate it, or like whether they slit their own wrists, or like whatever it is. There had to be some kind of blood to like seal the covenant. Like they would like that would be the exact equivalent of like a signature on a contract today. But yeah, it's good to see you, Joe. Glad you're here. This is our last little section here, and then we can talk about some other stuff. But then there's this last little section here. So Moses, Aaron, Nadib, and Abihu. So Aaron's... I feel
like this book has a lot of like repeating things, if you know what I mean.
Yes.
Like a lot of times it'll be like, God said to Moses, do this. And then like 2 verses later, it'll be like Moses said, and the exact same thing.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
I feel like there's a lot of repeats.
It very much is.
Just been like, and then he did that.
It very much is. And it's because of how Hebrew is written. Like, actually, I can give a great example of it right here for this line. Moses alone shall come near the Lord, but the others shall not come near, and the people shall not come up with him. This to me seems like a really wooden translation from the Hebrew, because in Hebrew they talk like that. In like if you actually read Hebrew woodenly, like we kind of cut out stuff. Like we don't obviously cut out stuff. When we translate from Hebrew to English, we obviously don't cut out material. But like they repeat things a lot and they use a lot of unnecessary words, right? So a good example is and. Hebrews use the word in Hebrew, they use the word and almost everywhere. It's crazy how much they use the word and we cut out like half of them. So, like most sentences begin with the word and. So, like this would probably actually read in the Hebrew, and then he said to Moses, well, I mean, I don't know this for fact, but I'm guessing this line here would probably read something along the lines of, and then he said to Moses, and come up to the Lord, you and Aaron and Nadab and Abihu and the 70 elders of Israel, and worship at a distance. And Moses alone shall come near the Lord, but, and this might actually even be and in their language that we're translating as but, the others shall not come near, and the people shall not come up with him. So we're not cutting
Is it just
material.
easier to write like that with however they were writing on whatever rock or scroll they were using
It's
for
possible that it was easier.
formatting?
It's possible that it was easier for them to write that way, and it could also just be that because this ancient form of Hebrew was like the first syllable language. Like it wasn't the first syllabic language, but it was among the first syllabic languages because everything before that was symbol language, like hieroglyphics and stuff. And this is one of the first times stuff is being written with like alphabetic characters. Um, I mean, I could pull up in my Hebrew here and try to show you guys potentially. So where do we start here? Well, this is chapter 24. So let's go down to chapter 24. So, this might be too hard actually. Maybe too hard of a lesson potentially. Also, this is a way that we kind of parse Hebrew languages in modern day. It wouldn't have been written like this originally, but these lines here have to deal with different lines of thought because they didn't really work with sentences. Like what they wrote was kind of like one long line of thought, and it could be broken up at points. Like there are breaking points. Like you see this character here, the very first one. I can't highlight it alone, but this very first one here on the right, because they go right to left. This very first one here on the right. This is a narrative. This is a marker for past narrative, and it can be used to start like a line of thought. So like you see a lot of these sentences begin with that very same character because that can be used to introduce a new line of thought. Not always, like this one doesn't have it, this one doesn't have it, this one doesn't have it. But we kind of, more like, kind of like poems. Honestly, that's a really good analogy in general. The Hebrew language is kind of a lot more similar to poetry than normal language because it repeats itself a lot. It has like a rhythm to it almost. Poetry could be a very good analogy, but they do repeat themselves a lot in the language. They use and a lot, and they repeat themselves a lot. Like this is a great example here. Like I was saying with this line, like in the Hebrew, it would literally probably read exactly like this: Moses alone shall come near the Lord, but the other shall not come near, and the people shall not come up with him. Like it says, it like you could condense that down in English so much better. Like they're basically saying the same thing 3 times in one sentence, but that's just kind of how they talked. Greek is a lot different. Greek is a lot more kind of straightforward, like how we would talk in English. But in Hebrew, it's very repetitive and very kind of wooden, almost. And all the ordinances and all the people answered with one voice. Yeah, I mean, even in this sentence, like even in the English translation, you can see kind of the way that it would have been in Hebrew. Moses came and told all the people all the words of the Lord, and all the ordinances, and all the people answered with one voice, and said, all the words that the Lord has spoken, we will do. And Moses wrote down all the words of the Lord. Right? Like you can kind of almost see like that would have been kind of their breakings, is like with the and almost, right? Moses came and told all the people all the words of the Lord and all the ordinances, and that would be kind of how like you would break it down almost. And then we have to like somehow translate it into English. Greek to English is a lot more straightforward. It's a lot easier to kind of do that. With Hebrew to English, it's a bit harder, just because of how different the Hebrew language is. First of all, second of all, it's very wooden. So you kind of have to take some liberty in translating it to English in the sense of making it make sense. Because if you just translated like specifically word for word without like Englishifying it, it would just sound weird. Um, yeah, and like there's also, for instance, like there's some words in the original Hebrew that we don't know for fact what they actually mean. Um, they're like we talked about this with what's an example we've had already? This is one we use in our textbook because it's a really good analogy, or it's a really good example. I mean, Joseph's coat. Joseph's coat is described with a word that we don't know because it's not used outside of the Bible, and it's only used to describe Joseph's coat. So there's actually three potential definitions, right? Rainbow, like coat of many colors, rainbow. That's typically the definition that we use in English. But it's not like guaranteed that's what it actually means. There's two other things it could mean that is speculated, right? So Joseph's coat could be being described as many colored, or it could be described as being very long, like very long sleeves, very long skirt, or it could be being described as specially threaded, like threaded with some kind of a design or threaded with a specific kind of color or something. But the point being, no matter which of those three definitions, the point that we're supposed to realize is that the coat is like very beautiful, it's unique, it's special. So the meaning of the passage is not changed, even though we don't necessarily know what the word means. Regardless, we know that it's a very special coat that was made specially for Joseph, and it like was pretty, it was beautiful in some capacity. Yeah, a bunch of stuff like that. So it's not a lot of words that we don't know, but there definitely are some that we don't, like a handful that we don't just know. Like we have an idea, but we try our best with what we have. So, Yav? I hope I'm saying that right, Yav. It's good to see you, man. Thanks for joining us. How are you going today? Should I call you Yav, or is there a different way to pronounce it? Or do you have a different name you'd rather? Do you have a different name you'd rather go by? It's good to see you, though. Thank you for joining us. Let me know what you'd rather be go by. We're coming up on the end of our little Bible study. Call me your friend. Aw, well that's cute. I love that. I love that. Okay, I'll call you from now on your friend. From now on, I'll call you friend, I guess. Hello, friend. Or I could call you literally your friend. So, hello, your friend. How are you doing today? You say my friend? Okay, I'll call you my friend. But yeah, you're coming in, good timing. So we just kind of finished up our thing. Well, not completely. We have a little bit more to go. Where were we at? Oh yeah, right here. They went up, and and they saw the God of Israel. Yeah. Oh, I just had another one come to mind. Like there's different phrasing of wording that they had in the ancient times that we just don't have today. So we have to translate it differently in the English. So one example has to do with siblings. They didn't use terms like older or younger. They didn't have that wording. What they did is they called them greater or lesser. So whenever Jacob and Esau are born, and it's the twins. Oh gosh. Yo, Joe, thank you so much for the follow. I appreciate that. I'm glad that you've been blessed enough by this conversation to give us a follow. So thank you for blessing my night as well. I appreciate that. Oh gosh, another one. And friend. Thank you, friends, for the follow as well. I appreciate that. Hopefully both of you have been blessed. Hopefully everybody's been blessed by this conversation. I appreciate you all being here, and thank you for blessing my night as well with some good conversation and everything. Oh gosh, where was I? Oh, the brothers. Yes. So they didn't have really words for older or younger. So, for example, whenever I was translating Jacob and Esau, whenever they are born, instead of it being, because they were twins, instead of it saying Esau the older and Jacob the younger, more accurately in the Hebrew, it would say Esau the greater and Jacob the lesser. Or another translation would be bigger and smaller. Greater, lesser, bigger, smaller, it's the same word in Hebrew. So you could also translate it as Esau the bigger and Jacob the smaller. So obviously in English, we change that wording so it makes sense to us, because we don't call an older sibling the bigger, we call them the older. So they didn't have a word for older, so we just translate it as older, even though that's not how they would have said it, right? So there's like nuances in translation that, like, you say it at first, you're like, oh, well, we take stuff out and we change stuff, and it's like, oh, that's horrible, why would you do that to the word of God? And then it's like, well, like, to make it make sense in English and for it not to be a cobbled mess, and that's why we have different English translations, because there's disagreements on how to translate from the original language into English. So that's why we have the NRSV and the ESV both pulled up here, and we go back and forth, because it's kind of an art, doing translation, and it's not really like, it's kind of a science, but it's more of an art, kind of. So let's just say it's complicated. Very complicated. So this is our last little section for the Bible study today, on the mountain with God. So we had just gone through, for friend and Joe. So we had just gone through. They're at Mount Sinai, and God gave the law, and now they're fulfilling they're sealing the covenant, which is what this section with the blood was that we were just talking about. And now for this final section to seal the covenant, then Moses and Aaron and Nadab and Abihu, which, as we saw from the genealogy, Nadab and Abihu are both Aaron's sons. So Moses, Aaron, and his two sons and the 70 elders of Israel went up, and they saw the Lord of Israel. Under his feet there was something like a pavement of sapphire stone, like the very heaven for clearness. God did not lay his hand on the chief men of the people of Israel. Also, they beheld God, and they ate and drank. So this is, like we were saying, this is another way that you would seal covenant, is with a meal. So you would, like, kill an animal and then eat it. I don't know if they're actually eating that animal that was killed. Probably not, because we said that there was burnt offering. But that was another way that you would seal a covenant back then, is with a meal. So it seems like they've done both. They've had the sacrificed oxen, and also they are having a meal, which was also symbolic of, sealing a covenant. So then the Lord said to Moses, "Come up to me on the mountain and wait there, and I will give you the tablets of stone with the law and the commandment, which I have written for their instruction." Right? So we think of the two tablets of for the 10 commandments, like the typical picture of Moses. Yeah, that's what it is. And as we talked about previously, we typically think of one tablet being the first 5 commandments and the second tablet being the other 5 commandments. But historically, if we take the ancient covenant formulation in mind, that's probably not how it was actually done. So whenever ancient treaties were made, ancient covenants, they would write down all of the stipulations onto 2 different documents. And one party would take the one document, and the other party would take the other document. And the idea was that both parties have written down what they agreed to, and they have proof of that, right? So it can't be altered, it can't be changed, and then further, the stipulations that they made for the covenant would be read aloud every so often, like once a year, once a month, however often. So the one party would read it every so often, the other party would read it so often, and that was how it was. So if we're following how ancient covenants were made, most likely it wasn't that half of the law was on one tablet and half the law was on the other tablet. The idea was that all of the law was on both, and the one tablet was for God, and the other tablet was for the Israelites. Obviously, there's no way to know that for sure, but if we're following what the ancient covenants looked like, that's probably what it actually was. Because then both of the tablets are put into the Ark of the Covenant, which is put in the Holy of Holies, which the Holy of Holies is the room of the tabernacle where it is believed that the high priest meets with God personally, right? Because the Holy of Holies is the room of the tabernacle where God is physically dwelling, and the high priest goes into the Holy of Holies to meet with God, right? So that's why there would be one tablet for God and one tablet for Israel, and they're both stored in the room where the high priest meets with God, is the idea. Because he hasn't broken them yet. Spoiler alert, we haven't gotten there yet. But yeah, they will be broken at some point. Not yet though. Pillar of smoke or fire. Oh no, I'm joking. I mean, I'm not joking. We haven't gotten there yet. I'm not joking about that part, but I mean, we get ahead of ourselves all the time, so it's not really a spoiler alert. I mean, we talk about Jesus all the time, so I mean, if we're talking about Jesus, that would be a major spoiler in terms of the biblical narrative. Um, but yeah, no, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. We go back and forth in the Bible and relate it to each other all the time and whatnot. And so don't worry about that. I'm joking about that part. But yeah, so we haven't gotten to that part in the narrative though. So we haven't gotten there yet where he breaks them yet. But this is the first set of 2 tablets that God gives to Moses. Yeah. Pillar of smoke or fire. Well, it's. Are you talking about the pillar that led the Israelites through the wilderness? Because it was both, technically, smoke and fire. Because it was in the tabernacle. So I don't think well, actually, you know what? It might say that the cloud came into the tabernacle. It might say that at one point. I don't actually remember for sure. I don't imagine that the cloud was still there in the Holy of Holies. It could have been. But the idea is that in the Holy of Holies was God's presence. I don't know if it was actually the pillar of smoke or fire that was in the tabernacle, but the idea is that at the very least, God's presence was in the Holy of Holies. There might actually be a moment where it says God enters the tabernacle, but I don't know where that would be off the top of my head. I'm pretty sure there's a moment where God enters the temple that Solomon built, though. I think there is a verse where it says God entered the temple. I don't remember if there's a verse where it says God enters the tabernacle. There probably is. There probably, after the tabernacle is finished, the priests come and consecrate it and God moves in. I don't remember off the top of my head, though. But, anyways. So, they came up and they eat and drink, which again is another form of sealing a covenant, was to have a meal between the two parties. And then Moses goes up. God's going to write them on tablets of stone, the law and the commandments, which I have written for their instruction. So Moses set out with his assistant Joshua. Joshua is going to be super important. And Moses went up the mountain of God to the elders. He had said, "Wait for us until we come to you again, for Aaron and Hur are with you. Whoever has a dispute may go to them." So, this is going to be super important. So Moses is going up with his assistant Joshua up the mountain to meet with God to get these tablets of stone. And we're going to see down here that it's for 40 days and 40 nights. And while Moses is gone for 40 days, Aaron and Hur are in charge. This is going to be really important for a future week. Super, super important. I forget what chapter it is. We can scroll ahead a little bit. So this is all tabernacle building, sacrificial stuff, oil for the lamp, vestments for the priests. There's a bunch of stuff about the priests and the tabernacle building and stuff like that. Daily offerings, altar of incense. It's going to take a while. We're getting there. Sabbath law, 2 tablets of the covenant. When God finished speaking with Moses in Sinai, he gave him the 2 tablets of the covenant, tablets of stone written on the finger of God. And then here, in chapter 32, we're not going to go over this week, but I'll read it real quick. So remember, while Moses is on the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights, Aaron is in charge of the people. And we're going to get to what that looks like during those 40 days, but it's going to be here in chapter 32. When the people saw that Moses delayed from coming down the mountain, the people gathered around Aaron and said to him, "Come make gods for us. We shall go before us. As for this Moses, the man who brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we do not know what has become of him." Right? He's gone for 40 days and 40 nights. The people don't know what to do about it. So Aaron is in charge. They go to Aaron and they say, "Make gods for us who shall go before us." I don't have time to go into this tonight. Obviously, we'll go over this another night. But there is an interesting detail here in that the people aren't asking for a replacement for God. The people in this situation are actually more asking for a replacement for Moses. Right? So in their ancient context, they believed that they needed a medium to intercede between them and God. So that's why they had their little idols, because that idol was a way for them to worship their God. So they believed, Moses was standing in for them to speak to God. So in this instance, they're actually, I know it says make gods for us, but in the Hebrew, it's more saying, it is saying make gods for us, but it's not saying to replace God. It's saying to replace Moses, right? Because the idols were an intercessor between them and their God, in the same way that Moses was interceding for the Israelites on God's behalf. So they're kind of asking to make a graven, which is still bad. I'm not justifying what they did. It's still horrible that they made an idol. But they weren't really, they were using it, So they still were going to worship this God who gave them that law, but they were making an idol to intercede for them for God. So they were like worshiping this idol as a representation of the God who led them out of Egypt. So they weren't, like, they still didn't do what was right. We're not justifying what they did. But typically, when we read this passage, we think the Israelites are doing a 180 and turning away from God and the covenant that they just made, when in reality, they didn't really understand the situation, and they are turning from God and not listening to what He said, but they're making this idol as a different way to worship the God who brought them out of Egypt. It's a little nuanced. So, yeah, it's like a 90 degree. That's how this passage ends, right? Our passage for today, it ends with the claim that Moses is gone for 40 days and Aaron is in charge of the people during that time. And during that time, while Moses is gone and Aaron is in charge, they have the golden calf incident, which is a really popular passage in this book. So that's why this is important here. So Moses goes up with his assistant Joshua. Aaron is in charge. Then Moses went up on the mountain, and the cloud covered the mountain. The glory of the Lord settled on Mount Sinai, and the cloud covered it for 6 days. On the seventh day he called out to Moses out of the cloud. Now the appearance of the glory of the Lord was like a devouring fire on the top of the mountain in the sight of the people of Israel. Moses entered the cloud and went up on the mountain. Moses was on the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights. So, that's our passage for the week. I have a couple things that I want to read. I've made my comment. Oh, well, I guess real quick, you guys can also, if you have any other comments about our passage for today, any questions, comments, concerns, anything, feel free to make them. We're not going to leave you guys with any questions or if there's anything you want to point out or anything like that. So if you have any questions, comments, concerns, feel free to make them.
Good stuff today, Mr. Logan.
Oh, well, I have a little bit more. Not a ton more, but I have a couple more things I want to read. I've been typically trying to end these with a couple, as I'm doing my outside research, typically the things that I find the most enlightening, I'll read off, as I've been doing the last couple weeks. So I feel like that's a tradition I want to keep up if you guys enjoyed that. So I had 2 sections I saw this week. One was from a devotional that I've been reading for the book of Exodus, and the other one was from this commentary I have right next to me. But I don't see anything coming through, so I'll read through these. So this first one is a short excerpt from the short devotional I've been going through on the book of Exodus while we do this Bible study. And this one reads, and I quote, "After the people's reluctance to be a kingdom of priests that we read about in chapter 20, God gave a list of additional laws to the 10 Commandments concerning the decision of the people. In our chapter today, we see the covenant is confirmed by God. Because the people did not want the intimate relationship with God that Moses had, they needed all the rules extra. We see in Jesus later on that if we pursue relationship with God and others, we do not need to be focused on lists of do's and don'ts, even if they are important. When we are in a living relationship with the holy God, we are changed from one degree of glory to another." So what is this saying? So first of all, this is not saying that this law is not important. What it is saying is that primarily our religion is not a list of do's and don'ts. Our religion is primarily a relationship with the God who loves us. So think about it this way. When you are in love with someone, right? Spouse, wife, girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever it is, right? That relationship is not about what you should do and don't do. It's about the relationship that you build with that person together. That doesn't mean you can cheat on them and do these other things. But if you truly love that person, then the things that you should do and don't do come naturally, right? If you are truly in love with another person, what you should do and shouldn't do comes second nature. It comes naturally because you love this person and you want to do what makes them happy and you don't want to do what makes them upset. You are not thinking primarily in that relationship every day that you should wake up and do this and don't do that. It comes naturally as an outgrowth of your love for that person. In the same way, this excerpt from this devotional is saying that the do's and don'ts of the law are important because they are showing us what God wants of us. But they are not primarily what we should be focused on. What we should be primarily focused on is our relationship with the God who loves us. And if we focus on the relationship with God first, if we love God more than anything else, then following this law will become second nature to us. Right? As Jesus says in the New Testament, if you love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and you love your neighbor as yourself, you can do no wrong. All the law and the prophets are hung upon those two rules, those two laws, and they're both focused on the relationship that we have with God and others. Right? And that's part of what the Pharisees got wrong. Right? The Pharisees had a lot right. You know, we give the Pharisees a lot of crap, and some of it's deserved, but they did get a lot right. Paul actually confirms this in the later New Testament books. Whenever Paul says, Paul essentially is writing to one of the churches, and he says in the letter, if you don't understand what I'm telling you or what the local Christians are telling you, then go to the Pharisees because they have it mostly right. Which is the point, right? The Pharisees were the religious group at the time that had it mostly right. Altus, I don't know if Altus is still here or not. He actually wrote a really good article surrounding this concerning Jesus and the Pharisees, and he was talking about how the traditions that Jesus grew up in and studied from were actually the Pharisaical tradition, because they were actually the Jewish tradition that had it most right. And whenever Jesus is critiquing the Pharisees, he's critiquing them on the specific things that they get wrong. Right? Think about it like our churches today here in America. Like, there's a lot that we get right, but there's some things we get wrong. Like, if Jesus came today, he would probably speak to our churches and do the same thing that he did to the Pharisees. And he'd point out our faults and say, you know, you're doing this wrong and this wrong and this wrong, and you need to fix that, right? But that was one of the things that the Pharisees got mostly wrong, was that they were so focused on the laws and the rules that they had that they let them get in the way of loving God and loving others. Right? Whenever Jesus heals the man on the Sabbath, and the Pharisees get upset at that, Jesus is making the point that they're letting their laws, their lists of do's and don'ts, get in the way of their relationship with God and others, because they were prioritizing the rules over the relationship. And that's what we as Christians need to understand, is that the relationship with God comes first. The relationship with God comes first. And like there's that tacky trend, there's that tacky saying, right? It's a cringy saying, but it's true. You know, I don't have a religion, I have a relationship, right? It's a really tacky saying that a lot of Christians nowadays say, but it's not wrong, right? Like, we don't primarily have a list of do's and don'ts. We primarily have a relationship with God, and the do's and don'ts come as a result and an outgrowth of that relationship. In the same way that God loves the Israelites and the Israelites want to love God, these lists of do's and don'ts are coming as an outgrowth of that relationship. The do's and don'ts are important. They're not primarily what we should be focused on. We should be focused on our relationship with God and loving him more every day. And if we do that, then these rules of do's and don'ts will come naturally. In the same way, if we truly love our spouse, our wife, our husband, our boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever, you will instinctively do what is right to love them. Same concept, right? So there was this section from that. And then I have also one other section here from this one. This is my Word on Fire commentary. I think it's a really good one. I've read through it quite a few times. It's probably not the best commentary I have overall, but it is written very story-like. And it makes it a lot easier to read like this on a stream, and it makes it very fulfilling to read, I guess. um, and this is a little excerpt from it. This is a statement from Henry de Lubac from the early 1900s. So you guys who are new that don't know what this commentary is, this commentary pulls from 2,000 years of church history and church leaders, and pulls their best excerpts on different passages and puts it into one place. So you'll go from Augustine in the 300s and all these early church fathers to medieval times leaders to modern day spokespeople, just like all over the place. So it's just kind of like the best things they can find on each passage, which makes it really fun to read through. But this is from Henry de Lubac, and it's probably translated, but it's called The Twofold Covenant. And I'll just read it off real quick, and I quote, "What we call nowadays the Old and New Testaments is not primarily a book. It is a twofold event, a twofold covenant, a twofold dispensation which unfolds its development throughout the ages, and which is fixed, one might suppose, by no written account. When the Father said that God was its author, the one and only author of the Old and New Testament, they did not liken him merely, nor indeed primarily, to a writer, but saw him in the founder, the lawgiver, the institutor of these two instruments of salvation. These two economies, these two dispensations, which are described in the Scriptures and which divide between them the history of the world. There is only one same God of both. They said one same Father. And did not St. Paul mention the two covenants or testaments before our New Testament was fully written? Convinced that all therein was full of deep and mysterious meaning, the Fathers bent over the inspired pages in which they could trace through its successive stages the covenant of God with the human race. They felt, rather than giving a commentary on a text or solving a verbal puzzle, they were interpreting a history. History, just like nature, or to an even greater degree, was a language to them. It was the Word of God. Now, throughout history, they encompassed a mystery which was to be fulfilled, to be accomplished historically and socially, through always in a spiritual manner, the mystery of Christ and his church." So this is a comment essentially on the covenant theory of the Bible, which that's a really deep theological conversation. Essentially, the conversation is about what is the Bible primarily discussing, right? And two of the popular theories are covenant and kingdom, right? So this is going along the covenant lines. It's talking about how the whole Bible is split between two covenants, right? The Old Testament covenant, which we're having established here at Mount Sinai in our passage today, and the New Testament covenant fulfilled through Jesus Christ, right? And then the other theory is about it being about kingdom, right? The kingdom of Israel, the kingdom of God. And that theory says that God is building his kingdom on this earth throughout the Bible. And we see the ups and downs of that through human interaction with God throughout. But I'll present you guys with a different theory. So clearly, covenant and kingdom are two very important themes throughout the Bible. Clearly. Covenant is what establishes the nation of Israel and sets up the rest of the works and history of Israel throughout the rest of the Old Testament. And covenant is what establishes Christ and the church in the New Testament. Clearly, kingdom is also a very clear motivator of the Old and New Testament in that God is building his kingdom through Israel slowly over time, and then also his kingdom through the church in the New Testament. But there is a separate third theory that is up and coming, I guess, that actually combines the two, but in a way that I find more appealing. The first I actually heard of this was from a professor a couple semesters ago. We were going through the Gospel of Mark. So I was taking a class on the Gospel of Mark, and my professor presented this theory that combines both into a very neat idea. And the idea is that the covenants and kingdom are tied up in the greater narrative of the Bible being about the battle between life and death. Right? The very beginning of the Bible has to deal with the Garden of Eden. And the Garden of Eden is the introduction of death and sin into the world. And the whole rest of the Bible has to deal with the battle between life and death, good and evil, until ultimately, at the very end of the book, in Revelation, we see the conquering of death and evil and sin ultimately and finally at the very end. Which, of course, is accomplished through Christ on the cross being the climax of the book. Right? And the analogy is D-Day and V-Day in World War II. Right? D-Day on the beaches of Normandy was not the end of World War II, but it was the battle that sealed the end of World War II. On the beaches of Normandy, there was plenty that went after that in World War II. Plenty of battles, plenty of death. But the victory at Normandy on D-Day sealed the fate of the Allies' victory in World War II. And it wasn't until V-Day, at the very end of World War II, when the treaties were signed, that brought an ultimate defeat of the Axis powers and an end to World War II. The Bible can be seen in the same light. The cross can be seen as the D-Day victory of life over death. The cross event being D-Day in that life's victory over death has been sealed. But the battle isn't over until the end of Revelation, when God finally comes, the second coming of Christ, and death is finally defeated. But we have the hope as Christians today, knowing that through the cross, life has won the war. Even if it's not completely sealed yet, the victory is all but inevitable. And that's why the covenants exist. That's why the kingdom exists. It's because ultimately, ever since our fall in the Garden of Eden that brought death into this world and sin into this world, God's task in this world among us, among Israel and among the church, has been to seal the fate of death completely. And I find that to be a pretty inspirational message, pretty hopeful message for the future. That despite all that's going on, we know that through Christ, the defeat of sin and death has been sealed. And we live in that hope. We live knowing that that will be the end result. So, that's all I've got. Once again, if there's any other questions, comments, anything that you guys want to ask, feel free to answer them. I know that last part, I cannot word it nearly as well as my professors would, or as my commentaries would, but I can try my best to word it as best as I can. So, sorry if my wording was a little weird or something, but hopefully the point was come across. But if there's any other questions, comments, concerns, anything, feel free to put them in so I can see them and we can talk about them real quick. I just saw Cole had to get going. I didn't get to say goodnight to him, so that kind of stinks. I still had my commentaries and everything pulled up. But if Cole, if you are still here, good night. If not, I apologize. And Joe, absolutely. Super awesome. Oh, thank you, man. Thank you for the compliments. I appreciate that a ton. Real quick, before we end, I do want to shout out. If you guys have any prayer requests, please let us know. We have a Discord that I will link here in the chat. We have a prayer request section on our Discord that we pray for every Wednesday before we head out. We have a ton of prayer requests. Actually, very recently, about a week ago, we instituted a new prayer list. We realized that we were getting so many prayer requests and a lot of them were getting drowned out. So we made an official prayer list so people can know what to be still praying for and what to know has been answered. So if you guys have any prayer requests, feel free to put them in the Twitch chat or put them in the Discord so we know to be praying for them. And real quick, I'm going to go through our prayer list real quick so that we can be praying for all the concerns in our community. So if you'll pray along with me as I read these aloud. First of all, we want to be praying for Evan. Evan, dear friend of mine who helped start this channel with me, still dealing with medical issues and everything. So we want to be praying for him with all of that. The special medic, we actually have a very recent praise that we haven't, I just got this today, so I haven't been able to update the prayer list yet. But we do have a praise that the missions trip he was asking funding for. So the previous prayer request was that he would be able to get funding to go on a missions trip that he was looking forward to going on. And the praise is that he did get the funding and he will get to go on the missions trip. So big praise for that. I know he was trying to get money for that for a very long time. He actually started his Twitch channel. So if you don't know the Special Medic, he's another Twitch streamer that does Bible studies. I completely, you guys should go check him out. He's awesome. But he actually started that channel, if I remember correctly, to get funding for that missions trip. So big praise. He's going to be able to finally go on that missions trip. And we pray that that goes well. And also another prayer request from the Special Medic. He also has a friend who has been dealing with some medical issues. So we want to still be praying for them. We have some prayer requests from Thomas. Thomas is asking for prayer for his mom, who is dealing with bad breathing problems, and also for his grandma, who's dealing with memory loss and cardiac issues. We want to be praying for Emma, which shout out to Emma, RPG Emma B, another Twitch streamer. You guys should go check her out as well. She's amazing, another great Christian streamer out there if you guys want to go follow her. She's asking for prayer right now because she is dealing with cancer, Hodgkin's lymphoma. So we are asking for prayer that she can, be winning in that battle. And we're also praying for wisdom as she goes about handling that part of her life going forward. We also have a prayer request from Leo. Leo is asking for success in school. He's been having some problems there, so we're asking for success in school. And another one from Leo, he's asking for his brother who just recently went through surgery. So we're asking for him to heal well. Another prayer request from Two Jug. Two Jug came by our Twitch chat however many couple weeks ago, might have been a couple months at this point. And he just asked for an unspoken prayer request. So we're going to keep praying for that for the time being until we can hear back. We also have a prayer request from Samuel Soros. Samuel Soros is asking for prayer for his brother. His brother is not a believer, and Samuel is asking for prayer that he will be able to speak well to his brother and that his brother might come to Christ. Kodo, I hope you're still here tonight. I don't know if you're still here or not, but if you are still here, we're praying for him as well. Another amazing Twitch streamer. We have a lot of amazing Twitch streamers that come around here. So Kodo007, go check him out. Another great streamer. He's been doing Worship Wednesdays. I don't think he was doing Worship Wednesday last week. I think it was a short stream or something whenever we went and rated him. But he's been doing Worship Wednesdays, so you can go check him out if he's live after this. And he's asking for prayer, first of all, on his job hunt. Pray that he might find the right job. And also prayer for his friends that they might come to Christ. Prayer request from Zev, who is known as Drift in the Twitch chat nowadays. He's asking for prayer for wisdom while he serves on YouVersion's prayer request team. We have a prayer request from Callie of the Toxic Family. They are another Twitch streamer that does Bible studies. So we have like quite a few Christian streamers that are doing worship stuff and Bible studies and stuff like that. So the Toxic Family is another one that I would recommend. And they're asking for prayer for their son. Their son just had an ACL tear. Their son had torn his ACL previously, and he had surgery, and it got healed, and it tore again. So we're praying for healing for their son. And they also have another prayer request for a charity that they help out with. The charity is called Laundry Love, and they're asking for funding for that charity. So prayer for both of those things for the Toxic Family. We have Make It Rain. Make It Rain is asking for prayer for healing from a recent procedure. Lavender Snorlax, a friend of mine from undergrad, she's asking for prayer for her boyfriend who has a job interview coming up. So prayer for that. We also have a prayer request for Viking. Viking is someone who's come by our community here and there. We want to pray for him. He's been dealing with depression and a lot of other really hard things in his life. So we want to pray for him as he deals with his depression and everything else that's going on in his life. We have a couple praises here at the end of the list. Praise for Cole. Cole had everything work out with school this semester, which was really great. And another praise from Cole. Cole had his brakes go out just the other day, and a big praise that no one was hurt. It doesn't seem like there was any damage, anything like that, and that he was able to get the brakes fixed with no damage, no one being hurt, anything like that. So big praises there for Cole. Another praise for Lavender Snorlax, the one I was just praying for earlier for her boyfriend with the job interview. Praise for Lavender Snorlax. She was asking in our Discord for months and months and months. She was trying to find a teaching job. She went to school for so long and did all these teaching placements and everything. And she, big praise, just a couple weeks ago, finally found her teaching job, and she's been having an amazing time doing that. So big praise for all of that. And then a couple new prayer requests that just came in this past week that aren't on the updated prayer list. We have a general prayer request for Gen Z. Just everything with going on with Gen Z as they come up in this tough world here in America. Well, Gen Z in America, I guess. Western world Gen Z. Prayer for them as they grow up in this, rough secular world. That things will be good for them. Was there any other ones? I feel like there was one other one from this week. I also have a praise as well that I'll get to in a second. Maybe that was it. Oh, the other one was Cole's Breaks. Sorry. Yeah, and that one we had as a praise. But yeah, and then one more praise from my end. I want to thank you guys for the prayer. As a lot of you know, but I guess not all of you because some are new tonight. I had a rough weekend. I had the news given to me on Friday, just this past Friday, that I had to move. So I currently go to seminary and I live on the apartments on campus. And there was a big plumbing issue in the building. And the specific area where they needed to work on the plumbing was right underneath my room. And that was kind of tough news to hear. But the seminary was super accommodating. They helped me move. They gave me a new place to live in, which is where I'm living now, as you can see behind me. So this room I actually just moved into this past weekend, Friday and Saturday. So I'm very new to this new place. But there was issues in the building for a whole week. The plumbing wasn't working in my room and some of the neighboring rooms. So I kind of figured something was going to be coming after they were coming in my room for a couple times. Throughout that whole week, they had told me they have to come in and work on it. So they were in and out all week working on it. And I kind of figured something was going to come on Friday whenever she emailed me. But I was asking for prayer in the situation, and a lot of you guys were praying for me, and I appreciate that a ton. So big praise that everything worked out. They moved me into a new apartment. They gave me back however much money for the semester. They helped me move over. They were incredibly accommodating and incredibly helpful with the move and everything like that. So praise that everything worked out there. And I got a new place, so I'm still not even a week into it, so it still feels a little weird. This is actually just the second time streaming in it, so big praise for that. Thank you so much for all the prayers for that as well. But that's all the prayer requests we have currently. If there's any other ones, feel free to put them in now. But we're a community that believes in the power of prayer, so that's why we end every Wednesday with this prayer section. Me and we all pray that, as we go through this week, you might think of some of these people and some of these situations and be praying for them as the week goes on. But if you'll join me in prayer real quick. Father in heaven, thank you so much for tonight. Thank you so much for this Bible study, for being able to join and have fellowship and to talk and have a good time. Thank you for all of the nonsense we had tonight with the side conversations at the beginning. Thank you for being able to talk about, weird history and archaeology and language and all that kind of stuff. I know we started late and everything, but it was really fun to be able to talk about all of that stuff and to hear from different backgrounds and different theologies and everything like that. So I thank you for being able to have that good conversation at the beginning, and I thank you for being able to have a good Bible study as well on top of that, as we normally would. I pray that everybody who came here tonight was very blessed by this conversation, just as much as I was blessed by this conversation. I pray that everybody learned something tonight, and I pray that as we go out into the rest of our week, school or work or whatnot, that we would serve you first in everything that we do, and that we would remember ultimately that you desire a relationship with us. I pray that we would remember that always, and that we would go out into this week, and that we would be gravitated towards you, and that we would desire more relationship with you. That our religion would not just be a list of do's and don'ts, but that we would know that you are our Father in heaven who loves us dearly and wants to spend time with us. We pray that this is a place here on this channel where your kingdom is furthered on this earth. Pray all of these things. And we pray for all of the things in our prayer list. We pray for all of our prayer requests in the Discord and the Twitch, and even all the things that haven't been mentioned that are in the back of people's minds. We pray that you will be with each person in each situation, attending to them in the unique ways that they need attending, and meeting every person in the ways that they need you. Pray all of these things in your name. Amen. So, thank you guys for coming here tonight. I appreciate you guys a ton. You guys are awesome. Joe, awesome to see you. Thank you for the follow. Glad that you enjoyed this. And friend, what was I forget the username already. It was weird. It was like a Yav.
Yav.
Yeah, Yav. That's what it was. Gosh, I said yawn. Quick tangent. In Greek, the V is an N. So now, whenever I read English, I've sometimes been pronouncing V as N, and it drives me nuts. Like, I saw the YAUV, and I wanted to pronounce it yawn because Greek has the V as an N. Oh my gosh. I wish I was joking, but I actually... And there's a couple of them that are like that. Like, the B is pronounced like a V. So, like, it's not baptize, it's baptize. Yeah, it's it's interesting getting used to for everybody who's new. Joe and Yav, sorry, I did it again. Yav and Joe and everyone and anybody else who's new. If you guys don't know, I'm in seminary and I'm learning Greek this semester as one of my classes. So I'm, working with Greek a little bit. Oh yeah, I mean that's great to yeah. So this channel, real quick, started this channel because me and my friends were praying about it, and we thought that we should do something, and like we felt God was calling us to do something, but we didn't know what. So that's why me and my friends started this channel. We felt God was calling us to lead this and to do this, and I realize now that a big part of that is, God's called me to get this seminary education, to get ordained, and I might as well share what I'm learning with the world. I realized as we were doing these streams that Um, People were actually interested in the weird Hebrew and Greek things that I was learning about, like the stuff that I thought no one would be interested in. People were actually interested in. So, it's kind of cool to see, I guess. Putting it to work, I guess. um, so yeah, that's a little bit of me, I guess, for everyone. But um, yeah, I guess thank you guys for coming. Nate, thank you for
What?
joining me in the chat. I appreciate you a ton.
Okay.
Um, it's nice to have somebody to talk to on these nights. So it's not
Yeah.
just me. So I
Yeah,
appreciate
I gotta
that.
act like this is a real Bible study or something. When I tell
Yeah.
people that I go to a Bible study on Wednesdays, they're like, "Do you go?" And I'm like, Well, it's this thing called Twitch, video games or something."
Oh,
I
don't
go,
don't worry. I tell people about this too, and they can't comprehend it.
"Yeah,
Like,
yeah."
I my
So now I actually have to like join you in the call to be like, "Oh no, I go.
yeah.
I participate."
My poor mom and dad, they're like the sweetest things in the world. They try to support this so much, but they genuinely still don't know what I do. Like they'll ask me about it and they'll ask these questions and I'm like, I get what you're asking, but it doesn't really apply to what we do. And like they're so support. As soon as they found out that I had or like that we had created merch to sell, which shout out. First of all, this
Yeah,
is
merch for your Bible study. Yeah.
yeah, 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 yeah. So, well,
Hmm.
so I'll get back to that with the parents, but shout out, plug in for everyone. This is actually one of the shirts on the store that's why I'm wearing it tonight. But the merch store that we have is not to like make profit, make money. Actually, all of the profits that we make off of this channel, actually, you can see it right above my head, this little bar. So all of the profits that are made off of this channel, whether it's through the merch store or through subscriptions or direct donations or whatever it is, all the money that's made off of this channel, 100% of it is going towards a charity that me and my friends run back home. So I'm at seminary right now. I'm not back home, but back home where I grew up with my friends, there's a little charity that we run once a year. We collect goods and hand them out to the less fortunate, and 100% of the profits of this channel go directly towards that. So we created that merch store actually just as a way to foster more funding for the charity. So if you want to get a shirt and know that the money's going towards something good, that's a way that you can help fund us and get something in return. But anyways, my amazing mom and dad, they found out because I just wore. I actually don't know if it was this one or a different one, but I wore one of these, and they're like, "Oh, that's a good shirt." And I was like, "Yeah, I made it." And they're like, "You made it?" And I was like, "Yeah, we made these for the charity." And like, they try to be as supportive as they can. They don't understand Twitch or Discord or anything like that, and they don't really care to for the. I know they've actually gone on YouTube and watched a couple of them. I know that, um, but the poor souls, they were so kind. They're like, well, why don't you buy us some? They were like, well, we want to get some of them. And I was like, well, I'll send you this link. And they're like, no, 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 because they're like countryside farm folk. That's how I grew up. I grew out on the countryside, like farm woods, and they're like, no, don't send us a link. Just buy it for us. It's like, okay, I'll buy it for you and give it to you. But yeah, my poor mom and dad, I love them so much. They're trying to be so supportive of this, but they don't really understand. Gosh, mom and dad, if you're like watching this video, thank you guys. I appreciate you. You guys are awesome. Um, but yeah. Anyways, um, but yeah. So, gosh, I don't remember where I was going with that. Anyways, take us all to class. I mean, I guess I could maybe. Actually, I don't know if that's legal. I was gonna say I could send you some of the recordings of classes, but I don't know if that's technically legal for me to do that. Maybe I can find like clips or something. I can send them your way if there's any good ones. Um, I do actually. She's shown up on stream a couple times. We're long distance right now. Um, well, fortunately and unfortunately, my God has called me and her to do different things right now. He's called me to go to seminary for ordination, and he's called her to do chaplaincy. And unfortunately, that's called us to go to different schools across the country. So for the time being, we're long distance. But whenever we've been together, she has actually joined on stream a couple times, which has been really nice. Great gift, yeah. I would ditch, like, wait, you would ditch class? What would you ditch? Oh gosh. Here, I'll swap back over to this one now that we're not using Logos anymore. Also very well. How old is very old? Or should I ask that? Maybe that's not something I should ask. Oh, okay, I gotcha. And you're using Twitch. That's it. I like that. See, it's not impossible. I need to use that as an example for my parents. I need to be like, hey, we had just had somebody the other day. You know, they came by. Why can't you figure out Twitch and stop by? I'll have to rub that in their faces next time. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. But anyways, well, we're a little bit over when we normally would be, but I've also really enjoyed tonight. It's been really fun. So I want to thank you guys a ton. My kids helped. Okay, that makes sense. That makes sense. I gotcha. But yeah, I want to thank you guys a ton. I really mean it. You guys have blessed my night. I really enjoy doing these Bible studies. Good way to fellowship and to learn together and everything. So thank you guys all for joining me tonight. You've blessed my night, and I hope I've been a blessing to yours as well. Nate, once again, thank you for joining me tonight. I appreciate that a ton. That was really cool. I think it seems like it's ramping up a little bit. I had a dry stretch where it was just me for a while, and Cole's been joining again, and you've been joining, and maybe we'll get some bigger calls for these.
That's because you finally let me in the recording studio.
I think
finally graciously allowed.
I'm gonna guess it was Zev. The more I think about it, I think it might have been. I'm gonna have to have a conversation with him. Because so shout out to Zev. He wasn't able to make it tonight. Shout out to Zev. He set up the Discord. I don't know like anything about Discord. I'm slowly learning how Discord works and everything like that. But whenever we first started, I didn't understand Discord like at all. So Zev graciously came through and set up most of it for me, and part of what he set up was the roles, which I didn't understand for the longest time, which I'm starting to understand, but I don't know the nuances of the roles. So I thought you could join, but I guess I had that wrong.
Don't worry about it.
I'm sorry about that. But yeah, thank you for joining tonight, and thank you to everyone for joining tonight. I appreciate you all. If you ever want to come back, I'll link one more time. If you want to join the Discord and chat with us, we talk in there every day at this point. It took a while to get there, but we're finally in there talking every day. Typically, the one that everyone talks about is the question of the day. So every single day we have a question that a lot of people go back and forth on, myself included. Today's question of the day was, if you could travel to any planet, which one would you choose and why? And we talked about that one a little bit. We also have the prayer request channel, like I talked about as well, and we encourage each other to, go to the gym and to read and do a bunch of other betterment type stuff as well. So if you want to join the Discord and talk with us and fellowship with us there, we'd love to have you. And if not, if Discord's not your thing, we also play games together. That's why we're called God's Gamers. So we have a public Minecraft server that we all play on throughout the week. Sometimes active, sometimes not, but there's quite a few people who play on it throughout, whenever they feel like it. So if you want to join that, details to join that are in the Discord, or I could message you as well if you want to come play Minecraft with us. We also have a Clash Royale clan. If you play Clash Royale, Cole helps lead the Minecraft server, and Dietrich, another person you guys didn't get to meet today, he runs the Clash Royale clan. So we'd love to fellowship and play with you on those. Or if you just want to come back for another stream, every single Tuesday night and Wednesday night at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we are live. Tuesday nights, we play games, and Wednesday nights, we do Bible study. So every single Tuesday, Wednesday, every week, Obviously, there's exceptions. Like last week, I had a really important phone call that I had to take with a friend of mine who was going through some, and because of that, we were about 45 minutes late, something like that. So occasionally there are things that will come up, and I'll message that in the Discord. But for the most part, 99% of the time, every single Tuesday, Wednesday, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, games on Tuesday, Bible study on Wednesday. We'd love to have you back again. But thank you guys so much for joining us tonight. I appreciate you guys a ton, and I'd love to see you around again. I'll be praying for you, and thank you for blessing my night. And I will see you guys around.
Mm-hmm.